fragile boy owned by the Mad Alpha. Omegaverse Werewolf Shifter Romance Audiobook. Written by Reinhardt. Chapter 1: The Flowers That Tried to Survive in Smoke. Oriath Veldenmoor had learned how to cry silently. The skill came in useful in a place like Drow's Hollow, where tears evaporated before they ever hit the soot-black cobblestones, swallowed by smoke and silence. On Bleak Petal Row, between the rotting fishmonger's shed and the boarded-up bakery with its fire-scorched facade, Oriath's stall crouched in the shadows like an afterthought. He sat behind a half-broken counter, stiff-fingered in the cold, threading wire through the wilted spine of a dried ranunculus. His fingertips were cracked, bleeding at the edges, and he kept the petals pristine by habit, because even in poverty, even when you're an unregistered Omega with a criminal mark, you learn to preserve what's beautiful. Today's bouquet: white roses with hollow stems, flecked with frost and soot. For the dead, perhaps, or the dying. Oriath didn't ask questions anymore. Thalen Moss, his employer, or rather, the beta man who had taken him in as a flower runner 2 years ago, stood a few feet away behind the wooden shutters of their shared stall, arguing with a customer. His voice rose and cracked, the same desperation behind it that never seemed to leave anyone in Drow's Hollow. You know what it costs to smuggle petals past the tax wardens? You want fresher ones. Go marry into Ivoron blood. The customer spat on the ground and left. Oriath exhaled, barely able to feel the cold anymore. His suppressants were wearing off. The latest batch had been cheap, smuggled through a back alley dealer, and they hit like fire and wore off like sand through fingers. He took another quickly. It burned down his throat like rust. His skin itched, his temples pounded, and still he worked, delicately, lovingly, as if the bouquet in his hand could somehow make the ache inside him mean something. A gust of wind kicked up ash and exhaust from the far edge of the street. He blinked rapidly. The air carried the sound of boots next, a too precise rhythm. Military. Enforcers. Oriath froze. They came 2 by 2, long coats swaying like curtains of blackened oilcloth. Helmets over their heads, visors glowing faint blue. The sigil on their armbands twisted in the fog. The cleansing directive. Black Market Enforcement Division. Omega Scent. Unlicensed. Active. One of them muttered. They were close. Too close. Oriath's hand slipped. The wire cut his palm. He tried to shrink further behind the table, crouching low behind wilted freesia and withering heather. His breath stung in his lungs. Don't look at them. Don't move. Don't. Omega at stall 27. Male. Late teens. Suppression signature weak. Possible induced heat. The voice was mechanical, flat. It wasn't even directed at him, and yet it stripped the marrow from his bones. Oriath bolted. He dropped the bouquet. The white roses scattered across the filthy street, crushed under his own feet. He darted behind the crates, his chest heaving, ducking between carts under awnings into the narrow alley that led to the back of the flour cold storage. He slammed the freezer door shut behind him and locked it. The hum of the refrigeration unit buzzed in his ears. He collapsed to the concrete floor, his knees scraping open. Blood welled from his hand and thigh. Outside, voices. Then boots. Then, crash. The lock tore off in one brutal kick. The cold air spilled into the alley, and with it, the black-coated officers. A gloved hand fisted into Oriath's hair and yanked him to his feet. He cried out. Another hand struck his ribs, once, twice, until he doubled over, coughing blood onto the floor. Found you, little flower. One of the enforcers sneered. You're not supposed to bloom without permission. Thalen appeared, running, shouting, swinging something. Oriath didn't see what, but the sound of the blow never came. A heavy thud followed. Oriath turned in time to see his mentor lying on the ground, groaning, his face bloodied. Thalen! A hand slammed against the back of Oriath's neck, forcing him to his knees. Cold metal cuffs clicked over his wrists. Dangerous pheromone profile. Sedative required, the officer said. Initiating transport to cleansing facility. Cleansing. It wasn't a euphemism. They dragged him forward, half-conscious, his vision spinning. No, Oriath rasped, clawing at the floor with his fingers. Please, don't. His voice cracked. No one listened. In that moment, he remembered the first time someone bought a flower from him. An old woman with tremors in her hands had taken a single daisy and whispered, "Even weeds deserve a place to grow." He clutched blindly for something, anything, and his hand landed on the bouquet he dropped earlier. Crushed but intact, one white rose still clung to its stem. He held it close. "I just wanted," he whispered, tears sliding from his lashes, "to be someone." The officer spat at the ground. "You're a statistic." He pressed Oriath's head down to the stone. Oriath closed his eyes. Then, the world bloomed gold. A pulse of pressure hit the cobblestones like thunder. Crates exploded outward. Flames licked at the air, and the scent that crashed over them all was alpha. Not just any alpha. It was wrong. Too strong. Too ancient. Not from here. Every enforcer in the market dropped to their knees in unison, their bodies unable to stand beneath it. Oriath felt it like a fever beneath his skin, a shiver along his spine. He looked up. High above, on the iron roof of a derelict tannery, a figure stood, cloaked in wind and shadow, long coat flaring behind him. His hair was a color Oriath had never seen before. Not silver, not black, obsidian wine, gleaming like blood in starlight, golden eyes, and a smirk like the devil had just picked his next obsession. Oriath stared. The alpha lifted 2 fingers to his lips and blew him a kiss. Then he vanished. Chapter 2, The Champagne That Should Never Be Drunk. Oriath had never seen the sky this clean. The soot-choked clouds of Drow's Hollow had vanished behind them, replaced by a shimmering pane of synthetic glass arching above the Moonbridge skyway. The car hummed beneath their feet. No wheels, no noise, just the faint pull of magnetic lines carrying them up, up, up into the crystalline hollows of the upper spires. He curled his hands into the sleeves of Thalen's oversized coat. It smelled like crushed lavender and old blood. Thalen sat opposite him, still breathing hard from the run. "Don't speak," Thalen said quietly. "Not until we're inside." Oriath nodded. He didn't trust his voice. His limbs still shook from the fight in the market. His ribs throbbed from where the enforcer had kicked him. Every step since then had felt like walking underwater, the pressure of the suppressants failing inch by inch. He'd taken too many, or not enough. Or something in him was just breaking. They arrived at the entrance to the upper ring, where most Omegas like Oriath wouldn't even be permitted to look up, let alone pass through. But Thalen handed the attendant a card. Not an ID, Oriath realized. An invitation. Moments later, they were through the gates. The world beyond sparkled with unnatural decadence. Vertical gardens hung from floating spires. Cars hovered like wasps. The buildings had no edges, just liquid glass and gold trim, pulsing like heartbeats. Oriath felt as though he'd been dropped into a fairy tale written by a sadist. Where are we going?" he finally asked. Thalen didn't answer. They walked 2 blocks, passed into an alley of chrome-tinted buildings, and stopped in front of a place without a name. Only a sigil above the door. A silver apple split open to reveal a bleeding rose. A man in a black waistcoat stood waiting at the entrance. His smile was too smooth. "Good evening," he said. "You must be here for the Eden Gathering." Thalen hesitated. He's not ready. The man didn't blink. He's breathing, isn't he? Then he looked at Oriath. You're a lovely little thing, the man said softly. And lucky. There's not often a seat open in the Silver Eden Club. But tonight, a very special patron has sponsored an Omega guest. Oriath flinched. I'm not. Hush, the man interrupted. They don't care what you are, dear. Just how you smell. He handed Oriath a silver card, intricately engraved, thin as a petal. The moment it touched Oriath's palm, it pulsed, like it recognized him. He stared. You're invited, the man said gently. To be seen. Thalen's jaw tightened. Don't trust. But Oriath was already stepping forward. He wasn't thinking clearly. He wasn't thinking at all. He only knew two things. 1, the enforcers weren't chasing him anymore. 2, for once in his life, someone was opening a door instead of slamming it in his face. Inside the Silver Eden Club, everything was velvet. Velvet shadows. Velvet smoke. Velvet voices murmuring like wine pouring over silk. He followed the attendant through winding corridors bathed in rose-gold light. The air shimmered with perfume, with pheromones too refined for any registry to track. Music pulsed low and slow, like the heartbeat of a beast curled beneath the floorboards. Your drink, the attendant said, placing a tall glass in his hand. Oriath blinked. What is it? Just champagne, the man smiled. Something to help you relax. He drank, tasted like stars and bruises. First nothing changed. Then everything did. The chill in his limbs evaporated. His skin tingled. The burn behind his eyes flared. Something in his stomach twisted, then dropped. His throat went dry, and his pulse slammed against his veins like a door trying to open from the inside. Suppressants don't fail like that. They don't shatter, unless someone meant them to. Oriath stumbled into the main hall of the club, clutching the glass. Bodies swayed to the music. A dozen eyes turned toward him. A dozen scents flared, testing the air. Omega, someone murmured. Unclaimed. Open. Oriath tried to walk. His knees buckled. He gasped, gripping the pillar beside him for balance. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered. He fell to his knees. His body was burning, his skin hypersensitive, his scent leaking like a storm broken loose. His gland throbbed at his nape, pulsing golden with every breath. The heat wasn't gradual, wasn't natural. Felt injected, designed. He tried to hide his neck. His fingers trembled. Tears welled in his eyes. No, he whispered. No, please, I didn't ask for this. His pheromones responded anyway, pouring out in waves. And the alphas came, drawn like wolves to blood. They circled slowly, like dancers pretending to be gentlemen. Their smiles glinted. Hands brushed his shoulders, his thighs, his hips. None of them touched directly, but they didn't need to. He was drowning in want, in fear, in humiliation. He crouched lower, pressing his face to his knees. Somebody laughed above him. He's perfect, said a voice. Ripe. He sobbed, his body shaking. Help, please. High above the floor, a balcony door hissed open. The sound cut through the air like a blade. Everything stopped. A man stepped out from the VIP suite. Not walked, sauntered. As though the whole world were his bedroom, and the chaos below an entertainment he'd merely grown tired of. Obsidian wine hair tumbled over his collar, loose and decadent. His shirt was unbuttoned at the throat. He crushed a half-lit cigarette beneath his boot and exhaled smoke that didn't leave his lips. His eyes locked on Oriath. Gold. Sharp. Amused. Dangerous. He leaned on the railing, one hand in his pocket, and smiled. Who, he drawled, allowed my air to smell this sweet? Chapter 3: The Night the Wolf Didn't Hold Back. Oriath tried to disappear into the marble floor. His pulse thudded louder than the club's bass, blood roaring in his ears, drowning out the murmurs around him. Every nerve in his body felt flayed open. Heat surged, unrelenting, like a fever that wouldn't break. And then, footsteps. Slow, unhurried. Sure. They cut through the tension like a blade, each tap of polished leather boots sending a fresh tremor through his bones. Valrek Iveron. The name wasn't spoken, but the presence said it all. He descended the grand staircase as if he'd built it solely to make an entrance. The crowd parted instinctively, heads bowed, knees weak, not from reverence, but because his pheromones hit like a whip across the spine. Oriath didn't look, couldn't, but he felt him, felt the air change, thickening like velvet soaked in wine, felt his own scent spike in fear, uncontrollably raw. A hand wrapped around his chin. Cold, calloused fingers tipped his head up, and Oriath gasped as gold eyes filled his vision, sharp as coins, bright as madness. They didn't blink. They didn't soften. They devoured. "You," Valrek said, voice low, rich and amused. "You're the reason this whole place reeks like a candy shop." Oriath tried to look away. The grip on his chin tightened. "I said—" Valrek leaned closer, his breath brushing against Oriath's lips. "You're mine tonight," Oriath whimpered, shaking. "And no, I didn't mean to." Valrek crouched to his level, still holding his face, and smiled like the edge of a blade. "You existed. That was enough." He stood, and with a nod, two guards moved forward, parting the circling alphas like curtains. "No, don't!" Oriath cried out as he was lifted roughly to his feet. Valrek caught his wrist before the guards could pull him too far. "No bruises," he warned them, dangerously calm. "His skin's too pretty to mar." Oriath's legs buckled again, but Valrek held him, effortlessly. The last thing he saw as they crossed into the velvet tunnel toward the VIP suites was Thalen. Just a glimpse, pushed behind a guard wall, too far to follow. The door slammed shut. Silence fell. The room was dark save for the neon flicker of the skyline beyond the one-way glass. The walls were black, the floor carpeted in crimson. A single bed stood at the center, king-sized, sheets rumpled from no earlier use, only waiting. Valrek tossed off his coat, revealing a linen shirt unbuttoned to the chest and a body built for domination. Lean, lethal, wrapped in muscle and arrogance. Oriath backed into the wall. "I didn't ask for this," he whispered. Valrek tilted his head. "And I didn't ask to find a flower in my club. But we both get what we don't deserve, don't we?" He stepped forward, slow and deliberate. Oriath darted right, fast but not faster than a predator. Valrek caught him by the waist and slammed him against the wall, not violently, but firmly, with full control. "Stop pretending," he murmured against Oriath's hair. "Your scent chose me the second it spilled across that floor." Oriath choked on his sob. "Please." Valrek's mouth brushed against the Omega's throat, heat and hunger barely held back. "Don't cry yet," he said. "It hasn't even started." The rest blurred. Clothes torn, not gently removed. Lips biting, not kissing. A body caged against a bed, writhing between desperation and surrender. The scene did not scream cruelty. It screamed possession. Oriath whimpered beneath every rough thrust, not knowing where he ended and this alpha began. His pleas cracked into quiet sobs, but Valrek's voice drowned them. "You smell like you've been waiting your whole life to be ruined." The sheets tangled. The headboard hit the wall in time with the ragged rhythm of a man who took what he wanted, and the soft cries of one who no longer had the strength to resist it. And just when Oriath thought it was over, Valrek bit him, hard. on the nape of his neck, where the gland bloomed open like a wound begging to be claimed. It wasn't a full mating mark, not the blood-deep seal of a bond, but it was close, just enough to imprint, enough to burn. When he pulled back, a pale silver rose bloomed across Oriath's nape. Faint, temporary, beautiful. Valrek stared at it with fascination, brushing a thumb over it. Oriath's body shivered, then collapsed into unconsciousness. He didn't see Valrek rise, shirt half undone, hair tousled like a prince who just conquered his war. Didn't hear him light another cigarette, exhale smoke toward the ceiling. Didn't watch him write a note in an elegant, disinterested scrawl on thick club stationery. Bring him to my estate. He's mine until I'm bored. Chapter 4, The Golden Cage with a Velvet Bed. The sheets were warm, too warm. Oriath stirred against a mattress too soft, in air too clean, with a silence too unnatural to be comforting. He blinked into a canopy of velvet and gold, blinking again to make sure it wasn't some cruel synthetic dream. But the weight around his wrist was real, cold, metallic, tight. He jerked upright in panic. A ring, thin, silver-black, latched around his left wrist, seamless, humming faintly with unnatural heat. A soft violet light pulsed from the band, and his heart leapt to his throat. Information suppressant ring, coiled around his gland like a leash. Not a full inhibitor, but a limiter, designed to mute his scent, scramble his instincts, control his heat patterns. Expensive, cruel. He scrambled to the edge of the bed and nearly fell. The room was too big. Golden chandeliers above, ivory walls carved with sprawling vines, velvet curtains draped like gowns over locked windows that looked out onto nothing. A garden maybe, an illusion of freedom. The door creaked. He froze, and then he walked in. Valrek Iveron, hair still damp from a late shower, shirt only halfway buttoned, barefoot, gold chains hanging carelessly around his throat. His skin gleamed, tanned and unbothered, as if he hadn't just abducted someone from a nightclub and dragged them into a gilded prison. Look at you, Valrek drawled, sitting in silk sheets like you were born for them. Oriath flinched, curling his arms over his chest. He hadn't even realized his old clothes were gone. He was in a soft, oversized sweater that smelled faintly of smoke and pine. Valrek sauntered closer, holding a porcelain cup. Milk, he said, placing it on the bedside table. Warm. Helps Omegas calm down when they're about to cry. I'm not. Oriath's voice cracked. He swallowed hard. I'm not going to cry. Valrek arched a brow. That wasn't what you said last night. Oriath's face flushed with heat that had nothing to do with information surges. I want to leave. Valrek laughed. Not unkindly, but unkind in its kindness. Like a wolf pretending to purr. Of course you do. That's the natural order of things. Bird in cage wants to fly. He leaned against the wall, arms folded. But the world out there wants your feathers plucked and your throat slit. So you'll stay in your little golden perch. Eat, sleep, bathe. Look pretty. Oriath stood shakily. You drugged me. What you did. Valrek's smile was paper thin. I saved you. From black market enforcers, from heat-crazed alphas, from your own collapsing lungs. You'd be a corpse by now if I hadn't taken you. You marked me, Oriath hissed. You had no right. Valrek stepped forward, slow and feral. I never ask permission from things I own. Oriath's knees hit the mattress edge. He sat hard, shaking. His fingers gripped the sheets. Valrek sighed like it was all a bit exhausting. You're overreacting, he said lightly. No one's hurt you here. You have food, a bed, clean water, peace. That's more than most of your kind get. My kind. Fragile little creatures, he muttered, always whining about chains while someone's out there sharpening the knife. Oriath looked down. His fists were white-knuckled in the sheets. His voice came so soft, it was barely breath. Thank you. Valrek blinked. What was that? Oriath's eyes stayed on the floor. I said thank you. Valrek stared at him. Something passed behind his golden gaze, strange and unreadable. Then he laughed, harsh and amused again, pushing off from the wall. Gods, he muttered. You're going to make me feed you by hand, aren't you? He strode toward the door, tossing something onto a nearby chair. Clean clothes, folded precisely. Baths through there. Try not to drown yourself in melodrama. The door shut behind him. Oriath collapsed back against the pillows, lungs burning. The scent of cedar lingered in the sheets. His scent, smothered under layers of Valrek's overwhelming presence. He cried in the bath. He didn't mean to. The heat, the silence, the clean water, it all felt like mockery. He sobbed into his palms as the soap ran red down his arms from cracked skin. For a moment it almost felt like being held, because no one was chasing him, hitting him, dragging him by the collar. He whispered, throat raw, "Thank you. Even if I hate you." No one answered, but the mirror fogged with steam, and through the haze, his own hollow eyes stared back at him. That night, he curled into the bed's corner, blanketed in silence too thick to breathe through. The manor creaked around him. Wind curled through unseen halls. Somewhere far off, a piano played, soft, wandering notes that didn't seem to belong to any melody. And then, a clock struck midnight. Footsteps. He barely had time to sit up before the door slammed open. Valrek entered like a storm in a silk robe, bare chest glowing in candlelight, scent sharp and furious. He didn't speak, just strode forward, pulled Oriath upright into his arms, and held him tight enough to steal air from his lungs. "What are you doing?" "You're leaking again," Valrek growled. "Your scent. It's too sweet." "I'm not. You're thinking of someone else." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Who?" "No one," Oriath gasped. Valrek pressed his face into the Omega's throat, inhaling. His fingers dug into Oriath's hips possessively. "You're mine," he whispered, soft and terrifying. Then he bit down, not on the gland, but close, hard enough to bruise. Oriath cried out, more in shock than pain, as Valrek whispered, "Say it. Say you're mine tonight." Oriath trembled. Tears slipped down his cheeks. "I'm yours," he choked out. Valrek smiled against his skin. "Good boy." Chapter 5: The Wolf Who Refused to Share. Oriath barely breathed as he stood frozen by the carved wall, fingers pressed into the velvet-papered paneling, his heart hammering so violently he thought it might burst through his ribs. The corridor outside Valrek's private ballroom shimmered with candlelight, and beyond the gold-embroidered curtain, he heard it, a voice he didn't recognize, smooth, male, precise, like a scalpel being unsheathed. "He's a rare one, Valrek," the stranger said, amused. "Unmarked, untested, whatever's in his scent. I've never seen such destabilizing hormonal readings. And I've seen everything. And I'm not done with him." Valrek's voice came, colder than usual. "You'll get nothing until I say so. I'm offering you a guaranteed seat on the council. Do you know what that means? You'd no longer be just the Iveron bastard. You'd have teeth." "I have teeth," Valrek replied with a purr laced in steel. "But I bite when I want, not when someone waves a treat." The other man chuckled. "Very well, but don't let yourself get attached. He's just a means to power." Silence. Then Valrek said, almost too soft to hear, "I don't share." Oriath's stomach churned. He took a step back, bumping against the cold stone column beside the hall. The words weren't even the worst part. It was the way Valrek had said them, like a promise, or a threat. He should run, back to the servants' quarters, anywhere. But as he turned, another noise stopped him, a rustle, sharp, near. A shadow moved at the far end of the corridor. Someone was watching. Someone else. Oriath's blood ran cold. The stranger stepped into view, slender, surgical. Not a guard. Not a servant. A man in a gray coat, black gloves, and spectacles that shimmered unnaturally in the light. The man smiled too wide. "Hello, little flower," he said softly. "You must be the one dripping starlight all over the manor. What a mess you've made." Oriath didn't wait. He ran. Not toward the exits. Not down the main halls. His feet carried him without thought, without plan, straight to Valrek's wing. Past the stained glass. Past the caged songbirds. Past the ridiculous opulence and the scent of roses in midwinter. He stopped only when he reached the carved obsidian door. Valrek's door. Trembling, he curled up against the cold marble floor beside it, breath hiccuping as his body caught up to the fear. He hated himself for it, for hiding like a child at the feet of a monster. But he remembered that smile, the way that man had looked at him like something to be dissected. And for once, Valrek didn't seem like the worst option. Footsteps. The door opened with a hiss of oiled hinges. Oriath flinched, expecting a kick, a command, a cruel insult. But Valrek just stood there, shirt half unbuttoned, golden eyes taking in the sight of the Omega collapsed at his threshold, arms wrapped around himself like armor. For once, Valrek didn't grin. He didn't speak right away. He just stared. And then, with a voice like gravel smoothed by velvet, he murmured, "I didn't summon you." Oriath didn't lift his head. He was shaking. "But since you're here," Valrek continued, his tone dipping lower, "you'd better never try to leave again." He reached down, not with violence, but with possession, lifted Oriath like he weighed nothing, carried him into the suite, away from the cold hall, away from whatever watched in the dark. Oriath clutched at his shirt weakly, eyelids fluttering. Valrek laid him on the bed and sat beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his damp forehead. "Did someone scare you?" he asked, too quiet. "Tell me who." Oriath didn't answer. He couldn't. But he didn't pull away when Valrek leaned in and pressed his nose against the curve of Oriath's neck. "Still smells like mine," Valrek whispered, almost to himself. Outside, down the hall and hidden in shadow, Dr. Lucien Vallis stood silently. He tapped a slim, metallic tablet, watching the bio-readings flicker in real time. His glasses lit up with neural tracking data as he observed the information wave pulse from Oriath's scent gland, intensity rising, spiking under stress, tinged with the unmistakable hormonal response of a forming imprint bond. "Fascinating," he whispered, and smiled. Chapter 6: The Wolf's Velvet Leash. Oriath sat on the edge of the glass balcony, knees pulled up to his chest, the chill air threading through his thin sleeves like ghost fingers. Below him, the gardens stretched out in perfect symmetry, moonlight silvering the frost that clung to the hedges. The silence was unnatural here, pristine, expensive, intentional. No distant sirens, no coughing neighbors, no rusted pipes shrieking overhead. Just cold glass, warm velvet cushions, and the oppressive scent of roses, even in winter. "You're not supposed to be out here alone," came the lazy voice behind him. He didn't look. He didn't need to. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Valrek stepped out barefoot, his silk robe undone and hanging like a discarded threat from his shoulders. Obsidian wine hair tousled, golden eyes glowing faintly in the dark. He looked less like a man and more like some ancient thing with too many teeth and not enough patience. "I didn't ask to be followed," Oriath said quietly, voice hoarse. Valrek hummed, stepping close enough that his scent curled around Oriath like a leash made of honey and pressure. You didn't ask? Valrek repeated, tilting his head. But you didn't exactly stop me either. He knelt down behind him, arms draping around Oriath's waist, chin resting on his shoulder. Oriath flinched but didn't pull away. He'd learned by now, pulling away only made things worse. Why are you out here? Valrek murmured against his neck. You're cold. I couldn't sleep. Too quiet. Too safe, Oriath whispered. I'm not used to it. Valrek was silent for a beat, then soft as silk being torn. You're mine now. You should get used to safety in my arms. He said it like a man promising a luxury pet it would never feel hunger again, as long as it never strayed. Inside, the fireplace crackled. A shadow shifted in the tower's monitoring panel, static flickering for barely a second on the corner screen. In a distant control room beneath the estate, a monitor logged a rise in Oriath's stress markers. Pupillary dilation, shallow breathing, elevated scent output. A technician in a nondescript coat scribbled notes with a stylus. Across the room, a distorted voice hissed from an intercom. Subject F-07 is adapting faster than anticipated. Dependency bond progressing. Increase surveillance. Prepare relocation protocol. Meanwhile, upstairs, the Wolf Plate house. Valrek pulled Oriath gently to his feet and led him back inside. He didn't drag, didn't bark commands, he never did. His power was quieter than that. More elegant, like a leash made of silk, soft until it strangled. Back in the suite, Oriath's hands shook as he accepted a mug of milk from Mira, the ever-silent maid. She gave him a look that could have been sympathy, or just well-trained blankness, and left without a word. Valrek lounged on the chaise, watching him with amusement. You shake like a leaf, he said, stretching. Oriath sipped the milk, eyes flickering to the locked door. You put something in this? Only comfort, Valrek said mockingly. The quiet stretched. Oriath sat down on the floor, back to the bed, gaze fixed on the fireplace. You don't need to sleep down there, Valrek said after a while. I told you the bed's big enough. I'm not yours, Oriath said. Valrek's eyes darkened. Aren't you? He rose, slow and deliberate, stalking over like a shadow with fangs. He crouched before Oriath, tilting his chin up with one finger. You cry in my house, eat my food, sit outside my door like a lost pet. Oriath's lips trembled. I didn't ask for any of this. You ran to it, Valrek said. When that freak from the shadows scared you. Who did you come to? I had nowhere else. Exactly, Valrek cut in. You belong to me now. Say it. Oriath's breath caught. No. Valrek's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then let's try something else. He moved in closer, lips brushing the curve of Oriath's throat. Not biting, not marking, just lingering, claiming space with breath. Oriath trembled. His voice broke. I'm tired, he whispered. I'm so tired. Please, don't send me away. Something in Valrek stilled. His hand, previously tight on Oriath's jaw, relaxed. He stared into those glassy gray eyes, read the exhaustion written into the bruises beneath them, the cracks in the boy's voice. For a flicker of a moment, too brief to be called kindness, his expression wavered. Then it twisted into something crueler. Oh, little flower, he purred. You've already given in. He pressed his thumb to Oriath's bottom lip, dragging it slightly down. You're addicted to me. You just haven't admitted it yet. Oriath closed his eyes, tears slipping free. Valrek gathered him in with a sigh, lifting him into his lap as if Oriath were a ribbon of light instead of a body half starved from fear. They sat like that a long time. And down in the control room, data poured in like wine into crystal. Information spikes, pulse rate elevation, passive sent output in response to the alpha's voice, plus 37%. Then the monitor flickered. A grainy overlay appeared. A scrambled voice whispered through the static. Omega subject, F07. Sent bond confirmed. Emotional dependency nearing terminal stage. Initiate capture sequence. The screen went dark again. Chapter 7, The Breath Beneath the Thorn Net. The greenhouse was too quiet. Oriath's hands moved mechanically, weaving stems through a lattice of green wire, thorns catching on his fingers like the tiny claws of a beast that didn't want to be tamed. He barely flinched at the pinpricks anymore. Pain was routine. Safety was foreign. He arranged the roses into a halo, petals bruised at the edges but still trying to bloom. Like him, the high-thorn greenhouse, with its glass panels dappled by rain and vines, was nestled in a back wing of the Iveron estate, far enough from the tower, close enough that Valrek could find him within minutes if he wanted to. And he always did. "You're bleeding," came the voice from behind, smooth as the blade of a knife dipped in wine. Oriath didn't turn. He simply whispered, "I know." Valrek crossed the stone path, boots crunching softly over dropped petals and broken twigs. His shirt was unbuttoned, collar hanging loose, as if he'd woken up and wandered here in a half-dream, or as if he had known. Somehow, "You always bleed," he murmured, crouching beside Oriath, golden eyes fixed on the small droplets of red trailing down his fingers. "Even when you don't scream." Oriath finally glanced at him, lashes damp. "Would it help if I screamed?" Valrek's head tilted. "No. It would ruin the roses." The silence between them was oddly gentle. For a moment it felt like the stillness before dusk, or before a storm. Then Valrek reached out and cupped Oriath's hand, bringing the wounded fingers to his lips. He kissed them lightly, a mockery of tenderness. "Why do you keep making things beautiful?" he whispered. "When you know they're going to die." Oriath's voice trembled. "Because if I don't, I'll forget how." That made Valrek pause. For once, he didn't have a cruel response. Just a breath, long, soft, confused. He stood and walked to the far bench, watching Oriath resume arranging the thorns with painstaking precision. "I don't get you," he muttered. "Most people scream when they're caged." Oriath didn't look up. "Maybe I'm not most people." He never was. It was sometime past midday when the assistant arrived. Mira, the usual greenhouse maid, had taken ill, an unusual occurrence, and suspiciously convenient. Oriath had been left alone for most of the morning, aside from the silent guards at the end of the corridor. Then a boy appeared, slim, younger than most staff, his apron crisply folded, hair neatly slicked back. His name tag read Relin. "I'm here to assist with the deliveries," he said with a polite smile. Oriath hesitated. "You're not Mira. She's sick." "Who sent you?" "Master Valrek," the boy replied too smoothly. Oriath's heart twisted. Still, he let the boy take a bundle of lavender and gestured to the crate beside the wall. "Those go to the east wing. Mind the broken pots." He turned away, trusting just enough. Too much. He didn't hear the syringe until it hissed. The assistant lunged, arms slamming around Oriath's waist, hand pressing something sharp into his side. Oriath screamed. Not softly, not timidly, but a ragged, instinctive shriek that tore from his throat like blood from a wound. "Help!" Another voice followed. Not just fear. "Valrek!" The boy hissed and yanked Oriath toward the open trapdoor near the ivy-draped wall, one that led into the old cellar tunnels. He never made it. The doors to the greenhouse shattered, and the wolf entered. Valrek didn't just walk, he stormed. Shirt half off, eyes burning gold bright. His pheromones flooded the air like a pressure wave. The assistant barely had time to turn before Valrek was on him. There was no elegance now. No sharp-tongued seduction or lazy arrogance. Only violence. The boy hit the ground with a wet crack. Valrek pinned him, fangs bared. Blood sprayed across the polished stones. A scream someone's was cut short by bone shattering. Then silence. Oriath had fallen, curled on the floor near the scattered flowers. Thorns dug into his arms. His breath came in choking sobs. Valrek stood in the ruin, chest heaving, hands dripping red. And he turned slowly, his eyes finding Oriath. For a moment he didn't speak. Then he crossed the broken glass and fell to his knees. He reached out, not roughly this time, but like a man afraid of breaking something too soft. Oriath didn't recoil. He reached up, hesitantly, desperately, and gripped the lapel of Valrek's shirt with trembling fingers. "Don't leave me," he whispered, voice barely audible. "Please don't leave me again." Valrek's entire body stilled. His arms closed around Oriath, pulling him in, holding tight. "I didn't leave," he said hoarsely. "I won't." Oriath shivered against him, face buried in his chest, heartbeat wild. Valrek looked down at the mess of flowers and glass and blood around them. He whispered, more to himself than anyone, "Why do I want to rip out their throats but not scare you away?" Oriath didn't answer. He didn't need to, because for the first time Valrek was scared of losing something, of breaking something. And somewhere far away, in a tower monitor room, Lucien Vallis stood watching the feed with a cigarette between his lips, smiling like a man watching a dog learn to beg. "Ah," he said softly to the empty air. "So the wolf does fear something after all." He turned the screen off. That makes him so much easier to break. Chapter 8: The Scent That Shouldn't Exist. The hallway to the Silveridge Medical Wing was too white, sterile, hushed, and humming with quiet dread. Oriath's footsteps barely made a sound on the marble floor, but each one felt like thunder in his chest. His wrists were cold where the velvet cuffs had been removed, his throat dry, his skin too tight. Valrek hadn't spoken since dragging him out of the greenhouse in silence. Not even when Oriath clutched at his coat, trembling, asking, "Am I in trouble?" No answer. Just a firm grip on his arm, possessive as ever, but colder, sharper, like Valrek himself didn't know if he wanted to protect or punish. Oriath kept his eyes low as the door opened with a pneumatic hiss. Dr. Calder, the estate physician, stood inside, older beta man with silver hair and gloves too clean. His expression didn't change when he saw Oriath. If anything, it hardened. "Strip," he said. Oriath blinked. Valrek's voice came, flat, just the upper layers. "Now." He obeyed, fingers fumbling with the buttons of the soft cream tunic Mira had chosen for him that morning. One sleeve slipped off his shoulder, revealing the faint shimmer of the silver rose mark Valrek had left on his nape. The air in the room felt colder immediately. The doctor pulled a device from the tray. Long, thin, tipped in needles and pale blue light. "I just need blood and pheromone vapor," Calder said. "Stand still." Oriath did. He closed his eyes when the prick came. He didn't flinch. He was used to hurting quietly. A low beep, then another. The machine blinked red. Calder's brows knit. He tapped in a sequence. Ran the test again. The room seemed to still around him. Then the doctor turned toward Valrek. "My lord," Calder said, voice carefully measured. "Did you know?" Valrek's posture shifted. "Know what?" Calder turned the scanner toward him. The screen displayed something in sharp, angular code, but Oriath couldn't read it. He only saw the warning glyphs. Read, repeating. "His scent compound," Calder said slowly, is not only beta-reactive and alpha-specific, it's catalytic. Valrek frowned. English. The doctor exhaled. Your Omega, he doesn't just trigger alpha response. He amplifies it. His scent contains a compound variant of class A13, extremely rare, thought to be dormant since the Dominion Purge. Oriath swayed. Calder continued, colder now. It's the kind used in illegal enhancement serums. Weaponized. It breaks alpha inhibition. Induces full feral states under stress. A long pause. Then he added, it shouldn't exist. Oriath froze, hands gripping his arms tightly. Valrek didn't move. He was very, very quiet. Test him again, he said finally. No need, Calder replied. The results are stable. I'm surprised he hasn't been taken already. Oriath's throat worked, but no sound came. Valrek's silence was worse than shouting. Worse than the night he'd bitten him. Worse than the man who'd killed for him in a greenhouse filled with blood and roses. It was the kind of silence people gave broken things. I'm sorry, Oriath whispered suddenly. I didn't mean to. Valrek's head snapped toward him. Oriath flinched, breath stuttering, hands wringing the hem of his tunic. I'm not trying to cause problems. I didn't know. I thought if I just stayed quiet. You think I care? Valrek growled, stepping forward. Oriath backed away. Stop it. I'm not trying to. I said shut up. Oriath shrank back against the medical cot, eyes wide. His scent was already spiking, panicked, terrified, blooming in the sterile air like crushed jasmine. Calder took a step back, cursing under his breath. Valrek gritted his teeth. His instincts were clawing at him, bite, claim, protect, devour. His body responded to Oriath's scent like wildfire, just as Calder said. But Oriath was crying again. Small, tight sounds, like petals wilting in his throat. Valrek's fists clenched. He stepped closer again, but softer this time. He knelt, slowly, at Oriath's feet. You didn't do anything wrong, he muttered. Oriath didn't answer. You didn't do anything. Still nothing. Valrek exhaled through his teeth, hands trembling once before he forced his tone into something smug and sharp, like always. Guess I'll have to keep you under tighter lock. Then, he said, voice curling at the edges. Wouldn't want anyone else sniffing around my science project. Oriath's shoulders shook. Valrek leaned closer, brushing his thumb over Oriath's jaw. The Omega didn't pull away. You're mine, he said low. Not Lucian's. Not the Council's. Mine. Am I broken? Oriath asked, so quietly it felt like something collapsing. Valrek blinked, and then he laughed. Harsh. Humorless. No, he said. You're dangerous. Later, after the test, Mira helped Oriath back into fresh clothes. The soft blue cotton wrapped loosely around him. His movements were slow. He didn't look in the mirror. He didn't ask for news. Valrek stood by the door, arms crossed. You'll stay in my wing from now on, he said. New locks. New clearance. No one enters without my scent code. Oriath nodded faintly. Valrek frowned. You're too quiet. I'm always quiet. You don't get to use that voice on me, he said, irritated. What voice? That one. Like you're already apologizing for breathing. Oriath blinked at him. Valrek cursed softly and left the room. That night, Oriath couldn't sleep. His scent suppressant had been taken away for further testing. His breathing was shallow. A low hum pulsed through the walls of the estate. The generator's whine, always faint, now strangely dissonant. He sat at the edge of the bed, staring out the window. The moon was rising through the glass. Outside, the estate gardens were still, until something moved. Click, click, something mechanical. Oriath leaned closer. There, on the windowsill, a small, black shape, delicate as a spider, but jointed like a weapon. Its legs clicked against the glass as it crawled upward, abdomen opening to reveal a thin silver needle. Oriath's breath caught, twitched, target locked. The spider leapt. Oriath screamed. The lights exploded on. Doors slammed open. Valrek's voice tore through the hallway like thunder. Oriath! Glass shattered. Then darkness. Chapter 9. The night the tower fell silent. The lights went out at exactly 2:17 a.m. Not a flicker. Not a warning. Just a sharp, sudden drop into blackness. As if someone had taken a blade to the power lines of the Iveron Tower and cut the artery that kept it alive. Silence spread next, swallowing the hum of machines, the rhythm of the HVAC, even the whisper of the greenhouse irrigation system 2 floors down. Mira dropped the tray she was carrying. A porcelain cup shattered. She screamed. Oriath sat upright in bed, heart instantly racing. His fingers clawed at the sheets, breath hitching. The air felt wrong. It was too still, like something ancient was holding its breath. Valrek? He called into the dark. No answer. He scrambled from the bed, nearly tripping as his bare feet hit the floor. He could smell it, something sharp, something metallic. Not blood. Ozone. Static, like a storm was coming through the walls. Then came the sound. A thud. A grunt. A scream cut short. Oriath staggered back, eyes wide in the pitch-black room. He moved toward the door, but it was already opening. A sliver of darkness beyond it peeled inward. And standing there were not Valrek's guards. Not anyone from the manor. They didn't wear armor. Just matte black suits with surgical masks, visors that gleamed faintly with infrared light. One held a pulse suppressor, a jagged device that crackled faintly with blue current. Oriath barely had time to scream. The needle was in his neck before the cry left his throat. He collapsed, the world spinning. As his head hit the edge of the dresser, blood running down his temple, his mouth moved again. Not a scream, a whisper. Valrek. Then darkness. At that same moment, 3 floors below, Valrek Iveron kicked open the west surveillance room door and found his command board blank. "Where is he?" he snarled. No one answered. All the guards were down, neatly, efficiently, without blood. Just unconscious. That alone told him who had done this. Lucian. Valrek's hands were already bleeding from where he'd punched through the panel. Sparks danced along his knuckles. His scent exploded outward, burnt wine and steel, slamming against the shattered circuits like a battering ram. Someone had taken his Omega. Not for sport. Not for ransom. For use. He didn't even put on a coat. Shirtless, wild-eyed, barefoot. He stormed up the stairwell, skipping entire flights, his body humming with such raw energy the very walls groaned under it. Lights flickered behind him, briefly, violently, then died. He reached the top floor just as Mira came stumbling out of a side hall, bloodied and breathless. "They took him," she sobbed. They shut the whole system down." Valrek didn't stop. Not even when his bare feet smeared blood across the tile. Not even when the scent trail vanished into cold air where the extraction pipe had opened. He only stopped when he reached the corridor outside Oriath's room. There, lying on the floor, was the bouquet. Small white florets from the greenhouse. Oriath had arranged them that morning. Carefully, gently. There were even thorns, hidden under satin ribbon. Like a secret the boy couldn't quite hide. Valrek dropped to his knees, picked it up with blood-stained fingers. He stared at the trembling petals. And then he whispered, "I don't allow anyone to take what's mine." His voice cracked. "Not even fate." The extraction pipe opened beneath the foundation of the tower and into the city's sewage grid. an illegal route carved by Lucian's network years before, once used to smuggle Omega corpses for testing. Now it carried something far more valuable. Oriath's unconscious body was laid across a soft velvet cloth in a hover crate. His skin glowed faintly under the scanner's pulse. The control module tracked his vitals. Still stable. Next to him sat a man in a dark coat, one of Lucian's handlers. He leaned in and brushed a finger along Oriath's jaw. "Poor little flower," he murmured. "He thinks the Alpha's going to save him. How quaint." The hover crate whirred down a narrow back tunnel and out into the slums. No lab, no restraints, just a dark alley behind an abandoned flower shop. They dumped Oriath onto the cold pavement like refuse. A few feet away, half covered in plastic sheeting and wet newspapers, was a body. Slumped, limp. When Oriath's fingers twitched hours later and his eyes fluttered open, the first thing he saw wasn't a ceiling. It was blood. A lot of it, soaking through the once familiar apron of the man who'd given him a place to hide. Taught him how to cut flowers without bruising the stems. Thalen. His throat was slit. The back door of the shop stood ajar, creaking faintly in the wind. Oriath's breath hitched. His mouth moved, no sound. Then, from the corner of the alley, a speaker crackled to life. Not loud, not theatrical, just intimate. Lucian's voice. Smooth, gentle, almost amused. "This is your first lesson," it said. "You will let him chase you again." Oriath screamed. The city didn't hear. But far above the sleeping towers, Valrek's head jerked toward the sky like a wolf catching the scent of blood. And this time he didn't stop to think. He ran. Chapter 10: The Broken Flower Boy. Oriath didn't move for a long time. The alley reeked of blood and garbage and smoke, but none of it registered. He sat with his knees pulled to his chest, curled against the icy bricks behind the flower shop where he used to laugh. The same bricks Thalen had leaned against while counting the meager coins from the day's sales. The same door Oriath had opened and closed 1,000 times. Now it was ajar. Flies buzzed. Blood pooled under Thalen's body, spreading like a red blossom beneath his apron. Oriath couldn't stop shaking. His hands wouldn't obey him. His lips moved, but nothing came out. Tears streaked down his soot-smudged cheeks, mixing with the ash and grime. His breath stuttered in his throat, shallow and fast like a bird's. The scent of trauma hung heavy in the air. Omega fear, pure and unmasked. A cry without voice. "You just sat there," Lucian said softly. He was only a few feet away, crouched like a spider just outside the frame of grief. His gloved hands folded, his suit spotless despite the filth. "You didn't fight. You didn't run. You cried." Oriath didn't look up. "That's good," Lucian said, almost kindly. "This is your truest shape. No pride, no sharp tongue, no illusions. Just fear. Softness. You're returning to what you were bred to be." Oriath's eyes finally blinked, wide and red-rimmed. His voice cracked out, barely audible. "Please." Lucian tilted his head. "Please what? Not kill you? I won't. That's not the point." He stood up slowly, brushing invisible dust from his knees. "The point is to mold you, break the noise out of you, shape the ache. Make him," he smiled faintly. "Watch it happen." A faint click echoed above. Lucian looked up toward the rooftops. "Which brings us to the final act of this little lesson." He turned, walking into the alley shadows. "You're his now," he said over his shoulder. "But he'll learn that even possession comes at a cost." The scent hit Valrek like a punch to the gut before he even reached Sable Hollow. His pupils blew wide. His heartbeat turned erratic. Every inch of him screamed Omega, but not in hunger, not in pleasure. It was panic, despair. blood-drenched roses with shattered stems. Something vital being torn away. His claws extended without thought. Fangs. A low, almost subsonic growl rumbled in his chest. The hoverbike crashed into a wall as he leapt from it mid-ride, hitting the ground in a snarl. The back alleys of the hollow opened before him like veins, pulsing with danger, with the residue of Lucien's sedative mist. It was a trap, a bait trail. He didn't care. He followed the scent, Oriath's scent, through smoke and sewage and sickness until he saw him, curled on the concrete, smeared with ash and blood, shaking like a broken leaf in a hurricane. And just behind him, the body. Valrek froze. His breath hitched once, then twice. Oriath lifted his head just enough to look at him. There were no screams, no accusations, just the softest, smallest voice. "I'm sorry," Oriath whispered, trembling. "I couldn't run fast enough. I didn't know where to go. I ruined everything." Valrek didn't speak. He walked forward slowly, boots crunching over glass, his face unreadable, his scent a tempest under his skin. Oriath flinched when he knelt, but Valrek didn't scold. He reached forward and wrapped both arms around him. Tight, possessive, like holding him together could keep the world from splitting in two. "You don't need to run," Valrek said roughly, his voice unsteady. "You just need to stay here, with me." Oriath sobbed, burying his face in Valrek's shoulder. Not because it would fix anything, but because it was the only safe place left. Valrek's hands curled tighter around him. Something in him shattered at the sound of those sobs. They weren't delicate. They weren't performative. They were raw. And someone had made him cry like this. Lucien. Valrek rose slowly, Oriath still in his arms. Then his eyes lifted to the rooftops. He didn't see anything, but he didn't have to. He felt it. The trap, the strings, the game. "You wanted a reaction?" he muttered, voice cold and low. "Fine." 5 minutes later, 3 of Lucien's informants lay in pieces outside the Sable Hollow perimeter wall. Blood painted the bricks in arcs. The last one had tried to run. Valrek let him, if only to see how far he'd get. Not far. He broke his spine with a twist and left him twitching in the gutter. Then, with Oriath bundled against his chest, he turned back toward the shadows of the manor. No ambulance. No call to the city watch. Just the Alpha carrying his Omega out of hell on foot, cloak soaked with blood. Not once did Oriath ask where they were going. Not once did Valrek look back. Far above, through a cracked surveillance lens inside a derelict silo, Lucien watched the scene unfold. A faint grin spread across his face. "So," he said softly, fingers steepled, "you can feel." He tapped a key on the console, saving the footage. "Then let's begin the second lesson." That night, Oriath lay curled in a silk bed, clean but trembling. Valrek sat nearby, his hands blood-stained, unmoving. Neither of them spoke. But in the silence between them, something old shifted. Not healing, but something tied. A leash neither of them could see, yet both of them felt. Chapter 11. The night he locked the world away. Oriath didn't dream that night. Or maybe he did. But it wasn't the kind that left visions, only sensations that clung to the ribs like smoke. Cold breath on his throat. Arms too strong. Scent too heavy. Then nothing. The walls came down in silence. He woke on silk sheets. Again. The room was not the one he'd known before. Not the tower suite. Not the greenhouse with its slanting golden light. Here there were no windows. The air was soft with filtered lavender and temperature control, and even the floor was velvet underfoot. But it didn't matter. It was still a cage. He sat up slowly, and the moment he did, the nausea returned. Not from hunger. That would have been manageable. No, this came from somewhere deeper, like his very cells were misfiring. He clutched his arms to his chest, shaking. No chains, no restraints. But the silence was louder than either. The moment the door opened, he flinched. Valrek entered with a glass bottle in one hand and something wrapped in cloth in the other. His obsidian wine hair glinted even in the dim light, and the scent that poured into the room was maddening, sharp, iron-rich, and laced with cinnamon spice. A dominant alpha scent, saturated, possessive. Oriath curled tighter into himself. Valrek kicked the door closed behind him and let out a breath. Still alive. That's good. I had a bet with Mira that you'd try to poison yourself with flower water or something poetic. Oriath didn't answer. He stared at the bouquet of crushed stems on the bedside table. They were limp now, overwatered and handled too many times. Valrek looked around, his eyes taking in the scratched tray of untouched food, the blood-stained cloth tucked under Oriath's pillow, and the faint tremble in the Omega's shoulders. He sighed. "Don't look at me like I'm the monster here," he said, stepping forward and setting the bottle and package down. "You think this is a dungeon? Sweetheart, this is paradise with the volume turned down." "You took me from the world," Oriath whispered. His voice was hoarse, brittle. "You locked me underground like I'm diseased." Valrek's expression sharpened. "You are rare. That's not the same thing." "I don't want to be rare." Valrek laughed once, bitter and bright. "Tough. You are. You think I dragged you here for fun?" Oriath didn't speak. The words, "Yes, I think that's exactly what you did," sat on his tongue like thorns. Valrek picked up the cloth bundle and unwrapped it on the velvet bench near the wall. Inside was a coat, deep plum velvet lined with fox fur, clearly tailored, clearly expensive. "Try it on." Oriath looked at him like he was insane. "What? Try on?" Valrek repeated more slowly. "You'll feel better in real fabric. And I'm tired of seeing you wear hospital linens like you're waiting for a death sentence." Oriath didn't move. Valrek crossed the room and crouched beside the bed. His golden eyes gleamed in the dim light. "I am not the villain in your story, Oriath. You bit me. You belonged to me before I did that." A heartbeat passed. Then another. Valrek leaned closer, his scent thickening, pressing. "I saved you from men who would have torn you apart in that club. I saved you again from the scientists who see you as a syringe of walking serotonin. I am the only reason you're alive. Then why am I not free?" Valrek stood up sharply, eyes flashing. "Because freedom is a lie when you're hunted. You don't want freedom. You want safety. And I am the only alpha who can give it to you without gagging on your scent." Oriath flinched. "I didn't ask for this scent." "I know." Valrek's voice finally softened. "I know you didn't." They stood in silence for a long time. Then Valrek turned and walked to the mirrored cabinet beside the bed. From inside, he pulled out a small vial of clear liquid and tossed it onto the sheets beside Oriath. "That's a stabilizer. Calder says your system's burning itself out trying to regulate your levels. Take it or don't. But if you puke on my bed again, I'll be annoyed." Oriath picked up the vial with shaking fingers. "You really think this is helping me?" Valrek's voice was quieter now. "No, I think it's helping me not lose you. That's the difference." When he left, the door didn't lock behind him. But Oriath didn't move. His fingers found the edge of the velvet coat. The fabric was soft, absurdly expensive, and completely wrong for someone like him. Still, his hands gripped it. It was warm. He didn't cry. Not yet. That came later, when the nausea finally passed, and his stomach stopped coiling in protest, and the silence of the safe vault no longer felt threatening, but familiar. The next morning, Mira brought breakfast on a silver tray. Eggs, cream, honey tea. Oriath didn't speak. She hovered, adjusting things, fluffing pillows. Eventually, she sat on the foot of the bed and looked at him. "You're lucky," she said quietly. "Why?" She gave him a strange smile. "Because Master Iveron doesn't do this. Not for anyone." Oriath stared at the tea. "You should hate him," he whispered. "I should," she agreed. "But I don't. And I'm not sure you do either." Oriath clenched his fingers into the sheets. He didn't know what he felt anymore. Later, when Valrek returned, Oriath was seated on the velvet chaise, a book in his lap, but his eyes unfocused. Valrek looked at him for a long moment, then at the walls, at the pale scratches on the glass terrarium that hadn't been there before, at the faint scent of blood in the air. "What did you do?" he asked. Oriath didn't look up. "Nothing." Valrek stalked forward, grabbed his chin, tilted his face up. His fingers weren't rough, but they were firm. "You hurt yourself?" Oriath didn't blink. "I was pruning the flowers." "With your fingers?" "With a knife." "Where's the knife now?" Oriath let his gaze drift to the side table. Valrek followed it. He saw the knife, saw the bloom-stained cloth wrapped around it like a sheath. "You're not to touch blades again," he said, his voice low. "Are you going to take away the roses, too?" Valrek's expression flickered. He moved, suddenly. Not violently, but fast. Oriath was against the wall, back pressed to the cool stone, before he could gasp. Valrek's breath was hot against his neck. "You think I'm your jailer?" Oriath's voice was shaking. "Aren't you?" "No," Valrek growled. "I'm the wolf who kept the other beasts from finding you first." "Then why do I still feel like I'm being devoured?" Valrek paused. Then, with shocking gentleness, he pressed his forehead to Oriath's. "You smell like you belong to me," he said quietly. "I don't know why, but you do. That scent, it was always meant to be mine." Oriath shook his head, but the tears were already forming. "You don't get to decide that." "No," Valrek murmured, voice low. "Then tell me you want someone else's scent on your skin." Oriath closed his eyes. "I don't want anyone." Valrek leaned closer. His lips brushed just behind Oriath's ear. "Lie better," he whispered. "Your body knows. Your blood knows." Oriath's breath stuttered. He hated how his body trembled in response, how it didn't flinch away, but leaned in, just a little. Valrek drew back slowly. His eyes were unreadable. "You're staying here, and no one's coming for you, not even the past." He walked to the door, paused. Then, without looking back, he said, "Rest. You'll need your strength soon." The door shut softly. Far below the manor, in the surveillance hub connected to the medical wing, Dr. Calder uploaded a series of encrypted blood scans to a secure black market channel. Subject: F07. Status: active. Location: confirmed. His fingers hovered over the final line. "Lucien will want this." He typed, "Catalyst confirmed. Behavioral instability onset. Recommend immediate containment." Then he clicked send. And somewhere in the industrial core of the city, Lucien Valles smiled. Chapter 12: His blood is not for sale. Valrek stood absolutely still. The data stream scrolled in front of his eyes, silent as snowfall, but each line was a betrayal. Each decrypted hash-tagged ID matched a timestamp. Each timestamp corresponded to one thing: Oriath's blood. The trail was invisible to most, buried beneath layers of obfuscation, but not to him. Valrek had built his empire on unearthing secrets. This was no different, except this time the secret bled. He slammed his fist down onto the console, the metal denting beneath his palm. A vicious hum erupted from his chest, and the entire surveillance wing trembled with the wave of his uncontrolled pheromones. "Get me Calder," he growled. No one moved. Because they knew. Every person in the room already knew. Calder was gone. Oriath didn't know he was burning. He only knew the flowers in the safe vault had started to wilt. He lay curled on the chaise, the silk sheets tangled around him, sweat-drenched and shivering, though the room remained perfectly temperate. His skin felt wrong, too tight, too sensitive. Every inhale scraped like frost across his lungs, and still he couldn't stop shaking. Something in him was unraveling. And beneath it all, like a thread sewn through every breath, pain. Not physical, not quite, but it lived there, in the marrow of him, in the shape of the screams that never made it past his lips. His body was trying to cry out in a language only monsters understood. Valrek stalked into the medbay like a god of vengeance incarnate. Calder was there, stupidly cowardly, still here, packing a bag, fingers trembling around a crate of serums and illegal nanodrives. "Don't bother," Valrek said, voice cold as iron. "The helipad's locked down. No one leaves." Calder turned white-faced, but tried to rally some dignity. "I don't know what you've been told, but—" Valrek didn't wait. He crossed the room in 2 strides and slammed Calder into the wall, claws unsheathed and glowing faintly red at the edges of his fingers. Alpha energy flared out of him like a furnace igniting. I felt his blood shift. "I didn't." Valrek's hand closed around the man's throat, lifting him an inch off the floor. Lucian touched him. His words were low. "You opened the gates." Calder struggled, wheezing. "You don't understand. He said the boy would die anyway if he stayed with you." Valrek's pupils dilated into slits. "You sold his blood. It's just samples." Valrek's claws sliced through the skin just below Calder's ear, pressing precisely against his scent gland. "You think I care about just?" He squeezed. Calder screamed. It wasn't a clean scream. It was wet. It was the sound of a gland rupturing under raw alpha pressure. Calder dropped like a boneless puppet, shaking, whimpering, body flooded with rejection chemicals from his own severed identity. Valrek stood over him, shaking with restrained violence. "Your scent," he said, voice savage, "no longer exists in this house." He turned without another word. Oriath's fever had worsened. He was barely conscious when Valrek reached him, lips parted, breath shallow. His skin was ice and flame in turn, his body twitching with phantom sensations. A thin red line had bloomed along his collarbone, blood from where he'd scratched himself raw in his sleep. Valrek dropped to his knees beside the bed and gathered him up without hesitation. "I've got you," he whispered, unsure whether he was speaking to Oriath or to himself. Oriath stirred, a faint, broken sound in his throat. His eyelashes fluttered, then slowly lifted. "Valrek?" His voice was slurred, dry as dust. "I'm here." A trembling hand reached up and grabbed the front of Valrek's shirt. "I dreamed. They cut me open," Oriath murmured. "My skin, my glands. They said I wasn't valuable unless I was broken." Valrek closed his eyes, jaw clenched so tight it ached. "You are not for sale," he said, voice thick with something dangerously human. Oriath smiled faintly, eyes half-lidded. "You sound scared." "I am," Valrek admitted and hated himself for it. "I thought you never got scared." "I do now." "Why?" Valrek leaned closer, forehead pressing to Oriath's burning temple. "Because I already threw away the key." There was a pause. Oriath's cracked lips moved. "The key to what?" Valrek didn't answer. Oriath's fingers clenched tighter in his shirt. "To freedom," Oriath murmured. "Or to escaping you?" Valrek froze. Then, in a rare gesture of surrender, he buried his face in the hollow of Oriath's neck. "I don't know," he whispered, truth slashing through him like winter wind. But I'm not giving you back. Far away, beneath city levels even the law refused to map, Lucien Valles stood in the cold blue light of his private laboratory. A tank glowed before him. Inside, suspended in viscous nutrient fluid, curled like a dream, was a body. Slender, pale, a replica, Oriath's body, or rather a nearly perfected simulation. The clone embryo floated, unmoving, but the readings across Lucien's console flickered. Neural activity, hormonal spikes, incomplete identity sequencing. Still soft, Lucien mused, brushing his fingers across the glass. Still full of fear. He turned away, lips twitching into a half-smile. That's the trouble with originals. They still think they have a soul. He tapped a sequence on the pad. Prepare Unit B, he told the automated voice. We begin controlled activation in 48 hours. Confirmed, the AI replied. Lucien tilted his head back, inhaled the sterile air, and smiled again. Let's see what your alpha does when the copy stops screaming and starts obeying. Chapter 13, The Cursed Garden Blooms. The scent of moon lilies hadn't yet faded when the first breath of winter swept into the garden. Oriath sat alone beneath the twisted silver yew, hands coated in damp soil, fingertips brushing the fresh buds of a flower he hadn't named. He had planted it without asking, as if its bloom might soften the silence between them. The Ivoron garden had once been a graveyard of thorns and forgotten things. Now it flourished, but Oriath didn't smile when the blossoms opened. He trimmed them carefully, head bowed, like laying flowers on a tomb. He hadn't spoken much since the fever broke. Valrek watched from the balcony, arms folded across the obsidian curve of the railing, his face hidden by shade. Every hour Oriath spent outside, Valrek spent tracking every breath, every scent, every twitch of Omega skin beneath thin cotton sleeves. The cursed leash between them, made of blood and pheromones and wounds too deep to suture, pulled tighter with every day of silence. Mira brought out a tray of warm broth. Oriath shook his head. I'm not hungry. You haven't eaten since morning, she said gently, setting it down anyway. Her eyes flicked toward the windows above, where Valrek's silhouette moved like a watchful god. He'll worry. Oriath didn't answer. His fingers trembled faintly as he reached for the pruning shears again, slicing dead petals from a creeping vine that had strangled a rosebud overnight. He always watches, he murmured, even when I sleep. Because he's afraid of losing you again, Mira whispered, but Oriath had already turned away. The garden was his only reprieve, a brief illusion of peace. The scent of wet earth helped silence the nightmares. And the nightmares had teeth. That night, the stars were veiled behind a low fog. The estate had visitors. Valrek sat in his office, a fire crackling in the hearth behind him, papers untouched. He watched the security monitors through half-lidded eyes. An Omega from the southern district had arrived unannounced with two high-ranking nobles. Their identities checked out on paper, but Valrek's instincts curled like a fist in his gut. Keep them under watch, he told Mira, who nodded and vanished into the corridor. He tapped into the private scent monitors discreetly embedded throughout the estate. 3 spikes, one too sweet, one too sharp, one that didn't register at all. His pulse stilled. Valrek stood, chair scraping against the stone with a snarl of iron. Oriath was alone in the eastern quadrant of the garden, tying trellises when he heard the voices. Soft, low, speaking in a language that didn't belong in any noble circle. He turned just in time to see the glint of a blade tucked beneath a servant's sash. The 3 Omegas moved like wolves. Smooth, efficient. Valrek's name caught in his throat, but too late. A vial shattered at his feet, releasing a cloud of scented vapor so potent Oriath nearly collapsed. His legs buckled. His vision swam. The chemical stung his throat, clogging it with honey-thick fog. The world tilted. His fingers scraped stone. He tried to scream, but the scent of Alpha filled the air like a hurricane. And then blood. Valrek arrived like a storm dressed in muscle and rage. He didn't hesitate. The first Omega's throat opened under his claws before the intruder could blink. The second tried to run, but Valrek's roar chased them into a pillar, where bone cracked under the weight of rage. The third, young, wide-eyed, barely more than a child, sank to their knees trembling. Valrek hesitated. Then he looked at Oriath, slumped against the garden wall, eyes wide and terrified. That hesitation cost the last intruder their life. Oriath blinked through the blood mist. His entire body shook. The scent in the air was madness and metal and something almost holy in its violence. Valrek stood over him, blood dripping from his hands, chest heaving, shirt torn, eyes glowing with a feral golden light. "Don't," Oriath whispered, flinching back. "Don't touch me." Valrek froze. His face slackened. His mouth opened, then closed. The monster receded behind his pupils like a tide. He stepped back. "See," he said hoarsely. "I told you. I'm not your savior." Oriath stared at the bodies. The garden he'd rebuilt now soaked in blood. And then, quietly, like a child trying to soothe a nightmare, "Do monsters hold people when they cry?" Valrek looked at him, stunned. Oriath's hands trembled as he reached up. His fingers barely grazed the hem of Valrek's blood-streaked coat before his knees gave out entirely. He collapsed into the Alpha's arms, weak, shivering. Valrek caught him, cradled him, held him, not like a prize, not like a possession, but like something breakable that he didn't know how to stop breaking. Later, Mira and Calder arrived with guards to clear the bodies. The assassins were silent now, but their corpses hummed with something unnatural. Valrek ordered full bioscans. Mira returned with the results in shaking hands. "These weren't mercenaries," she said. Valrek's voice was ice. "Then what were they?" She unfolded the scan sheet. Inside the spinal tissue of each intruder, implants, tamper-locked, equipped with self-destruct triggers. The name encoded in the nanotech. The Ashvale Cold Court. Lucian's ghost arm. Valrek stared down at the garden where the last petals had been stained red. He saw Oriath lying in bed behind glass, curled like a wounded creature, breathing shallow. Lucian wasn't just trying to steal the Omega. He was trying to turn Valrek into the blade that would destroy him. That night, Valrek stood at Oriath's bedside, staring at the faint bruises forming along his wrists. Oriath was half asleep, but his eyes opened the moment Valrek touched the sheets. "I'm sorry," Valrek said. The words tasted foreign in his mouth. Oriath didn't speak. Valrek sat down beside him, exhaling slowly. "You still think I'm a monster?" "No," Oriath murmured. "Monsters don't build gardens." A beat. "Then why are you crying when I come close?" "I don't know," Oriath whispered, voice small. "Maybe because I'm afraid you'll leave." Valrek's chest ached. He tucked the blanket higher over Oriath's shoulder and whispered, "Then I won't." But as he leaned down to brush his lips against Oriath's temple, a sensor screen flashed red behind him. Unauthorized upload detected. The Ashvale Cold Court hadn't failed. They'd just sent the first warning shot. And Valrek knew they would come again. But next time they wouldn't stop at blood. They'd come for the bond. For what had already begun to grow between them. In the underground lab of Ashvale, Lucian stared into the monitors with a smile like razors. "So," he whispered, voice low and delighted, "even the mad dog can learn to love his leash." He flicked the monitor, revealing a schematic of Oriath's scent profile, coded in shimmering lines of data. I'll make sure to rip it from his throat before it takes root too deep. He turned toward the second chamber. Inside, submerged in gel, a second figure floated. Unconscious. Identical. Eyes still closed. Lucian touched the glass. Let the real garden bloom. Chapter 14, The Collar That Glows in the Dark. The box was velvet-lined and bound in silver thread, resting in the center of Oriath's bed like a wedding gift. He stood at the threshold of his room, hesitant to approach. The air was quiet, deceptively still, and yet something inside him recoiled. Valrek stood a few steps behind him, arms crossed. Open it, he said simply. Oriath swallowed. His hands trembled as he undid the clasps. Inside lay a collar, black leather too soft to be anything but custom, studded with small glowing crystals that shimmered faintly with violet-blue light. A tracker? He asked softly, his voice barely above the whisper of silk. A signal shield and a beacon, Valrek corrected. It blocks Lucian's reach, and lets me find you anywhere. Oriath didn't touch it. His lips parted, then shut again. Valrek took a step closer. Put it on. Am I a possession to catalog now? Valrek's jaw tightened. You're a target. That collar will keep you safe. Oriath reached out, his fingers brushing the leather, but his face twisted with something fragile and breaking. It glows in the dark. Valrek didn't blink. So I'll never lose you. Oriath turned away, blinking fast. He took the collar and, with shaking fingers, fastened it around his own throat. The click echoed in the quiet room like a lock. That night, the fever returned. It began as a warmth in the collar, subtle, then searing. Oriath woke in a cold sweat, gasping, clawing at his neck. The crystals glowed hot against his skin, and the scent of his own pheromones flooded the room, sweet, spiraling, wrong. He stumbled from bed, his vision fractured. The collar tightened. His heart pounded with a predator's rhythm. He collapsed near the vanity, eyes wild, nails raking across his arms, leaving trails of red. Valrek stormed in moments later, alerted by sensors. He took in the scene, Oriath curled on the floor, blood on his skin, the collar pulsing. Lucian, Valrek growled. He tore the collar from Oriath's throat in one motion, snapping the metal like paper. The crystals sparked and hissed before shorting out. Oriath whimpered, curling into himself, his body trembling violently. Get Calder! Valrek barked to the guards outside. Now! But Calder wouldn't come, because Calder was already dead. The body of the medical officer had been discovered an hour prior, hung in the old stables with his tongue cut out and a note pinned to his chest. Still trusting your dogs, Valrek? We're already inside. Valrek descended into madness. Within the next hour, he had the corpse of an Ashvale Cold Court messenger, captured 2 days prior during an ambush attempt, stripped, mutilated, and nailed to the iron gates of the black market trading court. His message, scrawled in blood on a banner that hung beside the corpse, come near him again, and I'll burn every name in your lineage into ash. The underground factions recoiled, but Lucian did not. In his tower far from the city, he watched the footage with a cold smile. Around him, scent masking fog shimmered, and the image of Oriath's scent profile danced across his screens. He's afraid, Lucian said. Good. Love rots the sharpest teeth. Back in the manor, Oriath hadn't spoken for hours. He sat on the windowsill, wrapped in a thick robe, the skin of his neck raw where the collar had burned him. The scent in the room was unstable, dissonant. Mira hovered nearby, but said nothing. Valrek entered slowly. He looked like a storm trying to remember how to rain. Quiet, heavy. I'm not putting anything else on, Oriath said before Valrek could speak. His voice cracked with the effort. Valrek remained silent. Oriath turned toward him, eyes wide, brimming with unshed tears. Don't make me wear things that hurt. Don't tell me it's protection when it burns. I didn't ask to be owned. He stepped forward and grabbed the edge of Valrek's coat with shaking hands. Please, I'll stay. I'll be good. Just don't cage me. Don't lock me in glowing metal. Valrek exhaled, long and slow. He reached up, cupping the side of Oriath's face gently. You're mine, Oriath. That won't change. Oriath closed his eyes. Then tell me, he whispered. Do I have to get used to pain if I want to belong to you? Valrek leaned in. His voice was low. You have to get used to both. Pain and love. He kissed Oriath's forehead with a gentleness so at odds with the blood he'd spilled hours earlier that it felt unreal. Outside, the estate had been flooded with guards. Inside, Valrek began investigating Ashvale Cold Court in earnest. Every black market ledger, every contract, every shadow deal from the last 5 years was pored over. Yet Lucian's name never appeared. 'Cause Lucian didn't need a name. He only needed ghosts. That night, Oriath couldn't sleep. The dreams had returned. Cutting tables, surgical lights. His own scent turned inside out. He pushed the sheets away and wandered to the window, barefoot. The garden outside was silvered by moonlight. The fountain shimmered in the center. Something floated in it. Oriath blinked. A shape, hair like his, skin the same pale hue. He stumbled back, heart stuttering. It was a body, face up, wearing his face. Chapter 15, his copy, his curse. The scent of bleach clung to the walls of the Iveron laboratory, sharp and sterile beneath the faint sweetness of roses wilting in a vase no one had thought to replace. Screens blinked dimly against the cold lighting. On one of them, a frozen frame of the dead Omega in the fountain stared with glassy eyes too familiar, too much like his. Oriath stood in front of the image, arms wound tight around himself. His fingers dug into the sleeves of his robe until the fabric twisted. Valrek watched from the doorway, motionless, as if any sound would shatter what fragile thread of stability still hung between them. It's not me, Oriath whispered. No, Valrek said, voice low. But it was meant to be. A breath escaped Oriath's lungs. Not quite relief, not quite horror either. You didn't tell me they could do this. His voice trembled, not with anger, but with something heavier. You didn't tell me I could be made again. Valrek's jaw tightened. Because you can't. Can't I? Oriath turned, lifting tear-bright eyes to him. Lucian seems to think otherwise. Maybe he'll make a better version. One that doesn't cry, doesn't collapse. One that doesn't keep you from your precious wars with fevers and nightmares. Stop. Valrek's voice cracked like ice. Oriath didn't. Would you keep me if he made someone better? Someone obedient? Someone who doesn't tremble every time you touch him. Valrek crossed the room in 2 strides, seizing Oriath's shoulders with enough force to make the Omega gasp. There isn't a version of you, Valrek said, breath hot, furious, desperate, that I would want more than the one that already broke my goddamn world. Oriath blinked. His lips parted, but nothing came. I saw you floating in that fountain, Valrek said, voice low. Even when I knew it wasn't you. It felt like someone had carved the breath out of my lungs. Oriath pressed his forehead against Valrek's chest, like a flower leaning into wind it didn't trust. Then why? He murmured. Why did you ever put a collar on me? The question splintered between them. Valrek stilled. I didn't want to lose you, he said after a beat. So I tried to chain you, like a fucking coward. Oriath shook against him. You scare me when you're like this, but I think I'm more scared of being replaced. Valrek lowered his head, his lips brushing Oriath's hair. You won't be, he said. If he makes another, I'll kill it. A sudden sound cut through the silence, a high-pitched frequency, sharp as a needle prick behind the eyes. Every screen in the lab flickered once, then went black. A moment later, the largest monitor bloomed with static, and then Lucien's face appeared, pale and smiling. F-07, the doctor greeted. You're looking fragile today. Did the sight of your own corpse unnerve you? Valrek stepped forward, shielding Oriath with his body. You have 30 seconds before I burn your signal out of the sky. Oh, Valrek. Lucien sighed dramatically, still so possessive, so gloriously unstable. He leaned toward the camera as if they stood face to face. I thought you'd like to meet your replacement, Oriath. The image shifted. The tank, liquid suspension, and inside it, a figure suspended in glowing blue, its pale skin faintly luminous. Eyes closed. The face was eerily familiar. It was him, a near-perfect replica of Oriath except cleaner, smoother, empty. This one won't flinch when you raise your voice, Lucien whispered. It'll smile when you mark it, beg when you command it, kiss you first. Oriath's hand clutched Valrek's arm. His breath came too fast. You bastard, Valrek growled. Lucien tilted his head. Isn't it what you always wanted? A version that doesn't cry in the dark. Oriath pulled away from Valrek and stepped toward the screen. His face was pale, but his voice, when it came, held a cracked kind of strength. What do you want from me? Lucien's smile widened. Just your surrender, or your evolution, whichever comes first. The screen cut to black. The silence that followed was jagged. Oriath turned, his expression dazed. You heard him. He's already made another. I'm replaceable. No, Valrek moved fast, taking Oriath's face between his palms. Not harshly this time, gently, urgently. You are not a thing. You are not a blueprint. But I was made, Oriath said, voice tight. F-07. That's what he called me. Not a name. A number. I don't care if he called you the devil's spine. Valrek's forehead pressed to Oriath's. You are mine. You bleed, cry, tremble, because you're real. And I will destroy anything that tries to reduce you to something else. Oriath choked on a sob. You say that now. But what if one day you need someone stronger? Someone easier to control? I need, Valrek whispered. The one I already marked. His hand slid to the side of Oriath's neck, where his mark still throbbed faintly under the skin. You're not the curse, he added. Lucien is. Oriath looked up at him, wide-eyed, broken, and blooming all at once. Then what am I? Valrek's breath trembled. The only thing that makes me feel human. Outside, the wind picked up, hissing through the garden corridors. Somewhere in the manor's depths, power flickered. But in that room, for that moment, the only light was the flicker in Oriath's eyes, and the warmth of a hand refusing to let go. Chapter 16, the night he asked for the leash himself. Oriath's breath came in shallow, uneven gasps as he lay curled on the velvet chaise, sweat pooling at the hollow of his throat. The fire in the hearth cracked low, but it did nothing to warm him. He trembled beneath layers of silk and fur, eyes wide open yet seeing nothing that belonged to this room. The warmth of Iveron Manor had turned to frost in his mind. A fever clawed through him again. Not the kind that flesh brought, but one born of chemical imbalance, of information twisted beneath his skin. He tasted metal. He heard whispers in a voice too familiar to name. And when he blinked, he saw himself, not in a mirror, but flayed open, laying across a cold table. a second skin being fitted where his own had been peeled away. He screamed. Valrek burst into the room, his obsidian wine hair wild, jaw tight. His scent thundered across the space before he even spoke. Oriath. But Oriath didn't look at him. His hands gripped at the air, trying to pull invisible restraints off his own body. He clawed at his own arms. "It's not mine," he whispered. "This skin, it's not mine." Valrek strode to him and grabbed his wrists, firm but not violent. "Look at me. You're here. You're safe." "No, I'm not," Oriath cried, twisting in his hold. "He's showing me things. He's still inside me. Lucian's in the walls. He's in my veins. You're not under his control." Valrek's voice cut like a blade. "I burned every signal line they planted. I purged your bloodstream. You're clean." But Oriath's stare was wild, unbelieving. Valrek gathered him into his arms anyway, crushed him close despite the sweat, the panic, the trembling limbs. "It's just a nightmare," he muttered into his ear. Oriath whimpered. "Then why does it hurt like truth?" That night, Valrek moved Oriath to the lowest level of the manor, the safe vault, a chamber meant for shielding war prisoners or noble children during raids. It was lined with obsidian-infused steel and buried 3 floors beneath any signal reception. No mirrors, no windows, no doors Oriath could open without a key code only Valrek knew. Mira, the quiet maid, brought tea laced with calming extract. Oriath didn't drink it. He sat curled in the far corner of the room, face to the wall like a dying flower. His skin burned red from fever, but he wouldn't take off his robe. He muttered names, none of them real. Valrek watched, waited, tried to bring books, music, rare flower bulbs from Northern Isles. Nothing reached him. The only thing Oriath reacted to was Valrek's scent, and the sound of chains rattling in the corridor. Later that week, Valrek climbed the tower observatory, his last resort. The assistant to the royal astrologer was already waiting, cloaked in star-mapped velvet, face hidden by a mask of dark stone. They spoke in riddles. They always did. "You said his pheromones were devouring themselves?" Valrek said without patience. "Tell me why." "Because he wasn't born for balance," the assistant said calmly. "He was engineered for rupture. His very scent was crafted to unbind loyalty, rewrite the instincts of alphas and break the rules of pack bonding." "He's not a weapon." "He is," the assistant replied. "He's just unfinished." Valrek's fists clenched. "Then tell me how to finish him without losing him." "You can't. But you may delay the collapse. Briefly." "How?" The assistant dropped something into his palm. A single shard of black crystal. "Re-anchor him to reality," the assistant said, "or he'll rip out of it entirely." That night, Valrek returned with heavy steps to the vault chamber. Oriath was curled on the floor, unmoving. He didn't respond until Valrek approached. Then he flinched. "Oriath," Valrek said low. "Look at me." Oriath slowly turned. His eyes were dull and bruised around the edges. Fever slick, beautiful in a way that hurt. And then he did something that froze Valrek's blood. He crawled toward him on shaking limbs and knelt. "I want the collar," he whispered. Valrek stared. "What?" "Put it back on me." "No. Please." Oriath's voice cracked. "I need it. I need it to shut everything out. I can't keep seeing things. I saw you, Valrek. With him. With the other me. Touching him. Loving him. Laughing while I screamed. That wasn't real. But it felt real." Oriath wept. "I don't care anymore. I don't want to decide what's real or not. If it means I get silence, if it means I only see you, then just lock me down. Use the collar. Use anything. Please." Valrek crouched before him. Do you even understand what you're asking me for? I don't care. I'm breaking. If you're the only thing holding me together, then shackle me to you. Valrek was silent for a long time. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat and pulled out the collar, the same one Oriath had thrown off before. It shimmered faintly, faint traces of ethersteel running along its band. The beacon had been disabled. Now, it was only a closed circuit, something to ground him, to cage him. Valrek hesitated. Oriath looked up at him with broken glass in his eyes. If you don't belong to me, then I've lost the only reality I believed in. Valrek lifted the collar. His fingers trembled, not with hesitation, but something far darker. He leaned in. I told you, he murmured as he fastened it around Oriath's throat. You never had a choice. The lock clicked shut. Oriath exhaled a shuddering breath and collapsed into Valrek's arms, quiet for the first time in days. High above, beyond the sight of stars, Lucian stood in the mirror observatory of the Ashvale Cold Court, fingers ghosting across the glass. The scene played out before him like a private theater. He smiled, slow and cruel. Beautiful, he murmured. He begged for the leash. He turned to the vial of pheromone extract on the table. Next phase, self-erasure. Let's see what love looks like when it begins to devour itself. Chapter 17, The One Who Replaced the Moon. The halls of the court astrolabe rose like a spine of pale vertebrae against the sky, an impossible tower stretching toward a horizon that refused to end. Valrek stood at its base with Oriath bundled in his coat, the wind nipping against his skin. The manor had grown too unstable, too tainted with signal noise and memory triggers. Here, in the tower cloaked by ancient wards and starlit oaths, he hoped for something like truth. Oriath barely looked up. He hadn't spoken since the collar had been fastened again. His voice reduced to a bare murmur when necessary. His eyes tracked movements as if he expected them to split apart and reveal something monstrous underneath. Valrek guided him with one hand at the small of his back. The door to the astrolabe opened before they touched it. Valar Astareth awaited them. The court astrologer was draped in midnight robes stitched with constellations that shimmered and shifted with each breath. Their pale silver hair was bound high with rings of celestial brass, and their eyes, ancient and cruel, held no warmth, only precision. You've brought him, Valar said, voice like glass sliding against velvet. I need answers, Valrek replied. Now. You want absolution, Valar corrected. But all I offer is revelation. Oriath looked up slowly, his gaze locking on the astrologer as if something about them stirred an old terror. Valar turned to him. You've seen me before, though you don't remember. They gestured with one ringed hand, and the room behind them peeled open, an inner sanctum of mirrors, memory wires, and sigil-bound stone. Valrek took Oriath's hand and stepped inside. The chamber was cold. 3 rings of light floated overhead, slowly rotating. In the center stood a basin filled with glimmering black fluid, pulsing faintly with Oriath's heartbeat. Valar circled them. We are not here to ask what you remember, they said. We are here to uncover what was buried. And who buried it? Oriath's breath hitched. Valrek whispered into his ear. I'm here. Oriath nodded once. The memory reconstruction began. The moment the sigils activated, Oriath's body went rigid. He didn't scream. He couldn't. He was yanked inward, as if someone had cracked his skull open and pulled his soul through the gap. He saw flickers. A hand. A cold floor. A voice. Laughter too mechanical to be human. He saw white coats and blinking lights, a name tag torn in half, and then bodies, dozens of them, small, fragile, like his, Omega children curled in fetal position, some still twitching, some already stilled. All of them labeled, numbered. He saw himself dropped into that pile. He hadn't cried. He hadn't known how. Only when the serum entered his veins, burning, warping, flaring his sense so violently the air cracked, did Lucian lean close and whisper, "Perfect. Reaction logged." Oriath jolted from the vision with a strangled cry, collapsing into Valrek's arms. "They left me there," he gasped. "I wasn't even born. I was selected." Valrek held him tight, fingers tangling in his hair. "You weren't selected. You survived." Oriath shook his head. "I wasn't supposed to exist." "You do exist," Valrek said. "And not because of them. Because I chose you." Oriath looked up through tear-stained lashes. "You'd still choose me?" he asked, voice trembling. "Even if I'm just a mistake?" Valrek grabbed his chin, forcing his gaze upward. "I don't care what you are," he growled. "I don't care who made you. You're mine. That makes you real. That makes you enough." He crushed his mouth to Oriath's, bruising, brutal, sealing the words between their lips before Oriath could unravel again. "I say you exist," he whispered against his skin. "So you do. That's all that matters." Oriath let out a choked sob and clung to him. Valor, unmoved, observed from behind mirrored lenses. "Lucian did not make him to be loved," they said softly. "He made him to be replaceable." But the mistake he made was underestimating what an alpha will destroy for something that doesn't fit into any mold. Valrek turned sharply. "You said he's not the only one." "No," Valor said. "He is not the only failed prototype. And you are not the first alpha to be entangled." Valrek's pulse slowed. "What do you mean?" Valor raised a hand, and a new ring of starlight unfolded, projecting data not of Oriath, but others. Series names, failed bonds, alpha death logs, and in the lower corner of one file, faded, almost scrubbed clean, a name. Sierra Iveron, Valrek's mother. His fingers curled slowly into fists. She was involved. Valor nodded once. She was the only alpha who ever survived the early bond trials. Her data was suppressed. But Lucian never abandoned the project. He only waited until the next generation. Valrek's expression went still, empty, dangerous. He looked down at Oriath, who was already half asleep in his lap, exhausted and trembling. Valor offered one final word before vanishing back into their chamber. "Lucian is not trying to break him. He's trying to reclaim him, as property, as legacy. And if you do not end this now, you will only become another failed link in the chain." Elsewhere, buried deep in the obsidian root of the Black Spire, Lucian watched the new data streaming in from the reconstruction chamber. He did not flinch. He did not speak. He only smiled faintly, watching the growth chart of the latest prototype rising smoothly, without fluctuation. No memories, no resistance, no need for love, just obedience and destruction. "Let the Alpha rage," he murmured. "Let the Omega cling. I only need one of them to kneel." Chapter 18. His name was etched on my bone. The box arrived without a sound. It stood on the edge of Oriath's bed like a curse wrapped in velvet, the black ribbon tied so precisely it may as well have been strangling something inside. No courier, no message, just presence. Valrek hadn't touched it. Oriath did. His hands trembled as he peeled back the silk. Inside lay a narrow coffin of glass and iron, inlaid with symbols too old for translation. Nestled within, fragments of pale powder, a brittle scalpel, and something even worse. A sliver of carved bone, still flecked with gold tracer. Etched into its smooth curve was one code, F07. Valrek stood in the doorway, unmoving. His face had become unreadable. Oriath didn't cry, not at first. He simply stared at the artifacts like they would rearrange themselves into a different truth if he watched long enough. Then he found the note. It was tucked beneath the bone like a cruel afterthought. The ink shimmered silver black. You were always my favorite, Oriath. Every cell of you was sculpted for the divine. Even your agony. He dropped it like it burned. Valrek crossed the room in 3 steps and slammed the box shut, his scent flaring with violence. But Oriath jerked away. "Don't," he rasped. "Don't touch it. It's mine, isn't it? My beginning. My ending." Valrek's jaw clenched. "It's trash. He's trying to break you." Oriath laughed then, hollow and sharp. "Maybe I'm already broken. Did that occur to you?" He turned, walking barefoot out of the room. Valrek didn't follow. Oriath collapsed behind the garden's farthest hedge, knees pressing into the soft earth. The flowers didn't care. The air was sweet, unbothered. He curled his fingers around a stem and broke it clean in half. "What if none of me is real?" he whispered. "What if every thought I have is just a ghost of some chemical impulse he put there?" He imagined Lucien's fingers etching that bone, measuring him before he even had a name. Not a son, not a boy, an offering, a masterpiece. He bit into his wrist to silence the scream in his throat, and he didn't hear Valrek approach until the man's shadow fell over him. "You're bleeding," Valrek said hoarsely. "I know." Valrek crouched beside him, watching. He said nothing at first. Then, "You think I chose you because of him." Oriath laughed again. It was a sound Valrek had grown to hate. "Didn't you?" "No," Valrek said. "I chose you because I wanted something I couldn't control." Oriath stared at him, stunned. "You're chaos," Valrek murmured. "The world burns when you walk through it. I've never wanted anything more." Oriath's voice cracked. "But what if Lucien designed me that way?" Valrek reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the box again, and crushed it beneath his boot. Bones snapped. The metal buckled. Dust bloomed like ash. Valrek didn't stop until it was pulp. Oriath's breath stuttered. "I don't care where you came from," Valrek said, eyes burning. "I care where you're going." He pulled Oriath to him, burying his face in the curve of Oriath's neck, inhaling him like salvation. "You're not his weapon," Valrek growled. "You're mine now." Oriath didn't respond right away, but he didn't pull away. Later that night, they descended into the catacombs of Iveron, past the sealed rooms and forbidden corridors, into a vault so old it whispered when they walked. There, within the necro-coded archives, Valrek searched for his mother's name. He found it. Sierra Iveron, participant, primary carrier of trait 13A. Subject survived but rejected protocol bonding. Alpha gene partial saturation. Bonded male, subject V. Subject V. Him. He stared at the line until it blurred. So he hadn't just been born from aristocratic blood. He'd been grown in the remnants of Lucien's design. A half-seated godchild. An echo. A tether. He felt the scream crawl up his throat and shoved it down. Oriath stood beside him, silent. "We're not free of this," Valrek finally said. "Not yet." Oriath met his gaze. "Then what do? We leave." Hours later, as the last light drained from Iveron's tower, Lucien stood at the edge of a black-paneled control room inside the Ashvale Cold Court. He watched through a dozen lenses, the light of a dozen distant moons reflected in his eyes. He smiled as 2 shadows stepped toward the manor gates. "Let them go," he said softly to the drones around him. "But mark my words. They leave." He turned, voice a knife wrapped in silk. "But they don't come back." The Cold Court's red lights began to blink. The order was live. The hunt was on. Chapter 19, The Moon-Faced Graveyard. They should have never left the manor on foot. The air in the Ashvale forest was too still, too starved. Every branch held its breath. Every shadow leaned closer. Oriath had felt it first. An ache behind his teeth. A tingle on the inside of his wrist, as though something unseen had just whispered his name through the marrow of the trees. Valrek had noticed too late. The first strike came without sound. A fine tipped dart sunk deep into Valrek's shoulder. He snarled, ripped it free, and tossed Oriath behind him, but the second came faster. Then came the howling. Not wolves, Omega hounds, Ashvile's infamous execution squads, bred not for tracking, but for breaking. They descended from the trees in silver masks and robes that reeked of synthetic dominance, their information signatures soaked in induced obedience. Even their steps were coordinated, like puppets pulled by one hand. Oriath didn't scream. He ran. Valrek was already bleeding. The last thing Oriath saw before his body was tackled into the underbrush was Valrek turning. Fangs bared, eyes feral, as he vanished beneath a swarm of cold masked limbs. He woke to pain. Not sharp, not screaming. Worse, it was slow. A pull, a stretch, a drowning. He was strapped upright in a ring of crystalline salt, wrists bound behind him, and a lattice of symbols drawn in shining blood surrounded the floor. A summoning circle, no, a siphoning well. They called it the resonation pit, the pheromone echo well, as Lucian once coined it in clinical files. And it was singing now. Oriath's scent glands pulsed. His bones felt porous. Every breath he took pulled in more of the synthetic gas flooding the air, custom-engineered to match Valrek's information signature, twisted just enough to make his instincts scream mate, mate, mate until his entire spine arched in betrayal. He screamed, not in fear, in confusion, in need. Lucian's voice was soft and distant, echoing through hidden speakers like a bedtime story. You'll give in soon. No one survives the resonation well unless they surrender. I'll never, Oriath choked, head snapping back. You're not him. You're not. But I own your scent, sweetheart, Lucian whispered. I own your instincts. Then the world spun. Not physically, psychically. He saw Valrek's mouth on someone else. His own clone, laughing beneath him, writhing in pleasure. He heard himself screaming, but it wasn't his scream. He thrashed. The vision wouldn't fade. His nose bled. His ears rang. The world fractured. His knees gave way. The restraints caught him, forcing him upright again. Lucian chuckled. Then came a sound the resonation well had never encountered before. Not gas, not pheromone, but something more primal. A scream, from far away. And it wasn't Oriath's. It was Valrek's. Somewhere in the trees beyond the cold court's perimeter, Valrek bit down on his own wrist and tore. He didn't mark it. He ripped it open. Not enough to kill. Enough to flood the forest in his signature. He dug claws into his own neck, ruptured one gland, then another. Each time he howled Oriath's name. More of his scent, unfiltered, raw, chaotic, bled into the sky, forming a storm cloud the forest couldn't contain. The trees bowed. The wind twisted. The frequencies in the resonation pit glitched. Oriath felt it like lightning in his chest. He gasped. Valrek's scent reached him, and with it came clarity. Lucian's illusions shattered like stained glass. Oriath dropped to his knees, sobbing. Then movement. The circle cracked. Oriath pushed himself upright, blood still streaking from his ears, and screamed Valrek until his lungs gave out. The door burst inward, and Valrek was there, broken, shaking, his eyes wide with madness, but still standing, still his. You're insane? Oriath gasped, as Valrek hauled him into his arms. Valrek bled freely, from his wrists, his neck, his eyes. But he was smiling. "To save you," he whispered. "I'll go insane every time." Oriath touched his face, trembling. "Then I'll stay with you, even if we're both lost." They didn't wait. Lucian would send more. Valrek half-dragged, half-carried Oriath into the deeper ruins of the forest, following faint paths carved by time and abandonment. They reached it at dawn, a ruin half-eaten by roots and grief, a collapsed temple crowned in silver lichen. The symbol of the moon goddess still shimmered on one cracked wall, half erased by age. Inside, they found nothing but bones and quiet. But it was safe. Valrek collapsed beside Oriath, unable to speak. His information field was disintegrating, permanently unraveled by what he'd done. No alpha survived severing their own glands and lived unchanged. He was breaking, and Oriath knew it. He leaned into him, forehead pressed to sweat-slick skin. "I'm here," he murmured. "I'm yours." Valrek's fingers twitched. "I can't fix this." "You don't have to." They stayed like that until the wind shifted. That night, Oriath wandered into the temple's deepest corridor. There, carved into an altar of moonstone and dust, he found a broken slab, still glowing faintly beneath the grime. He wiped it clean with his sleeve. The inscription was old, in a dialect only half-translated. But he understood enough. "When the blood of the moon burns, destruction shall bloom, and with it rebirth." The name beneath chilled him. Velden Moore. His name. The moon-blooded. Curse. A beginning. His hands shook. Behind him, Valrek whispered, barely conscious. "Oriath?" Oriath turned, heart thudding. He whispered back, "They made me a weapon." Valrek's gaze burned through the dark. "Then let's make them regret ever forging you." Chapter 20. He burned for my sins. The ruined temple shuddered like a dying heart. Oriath felt it before he heard it. The shift in the earth, the tremble of memory turning into something alive. Valrek lay on the stone floor nearby, his breath shallow, skin slick with fever. The residual effects of his gland rupture had left his system untethered, sent spiraling like a broken storm. "Oriath," he rasped, reaching blindly toward him. "Something's coming." Oriath was already on his feet, fingers curling tight around the bone-hilted dagger he'd taken from the shrine. And then it arrived, not with a scream, not with fire, but with silence. The stone wall behind the altar cracked open, and something stepped through. Not quite human, not quite Omega, not Lucian, but of him. The figure moved like a dream torn at the edges. Its face was a reflection of Oriath's own. Smoothed, perfected, erased of all fear or softness. Only the eyes were wrong. Wide, glassy, drenched in hunger. The failed clone. Lucian had named it F7.5. It had no voice, just instinct, and its only instinct now was annihilation. Oriath stood frozen as it tilted its head, scenting the air. He could feel it, not just looking at him, but into him, into the pheromone signature coiled at the base of his spine, into the bloodline Lucian had stitched together from the bones of moons and curses. Then it lunged. Oriath didn't scream. Valrek did. Valrek moved before he could think. He saw the thing's claws arc toward Oriath's throat and threw himself between them, the dagger barely scraping the clone's chest. It didn't bleed. It hissed, stumbling back, but reoriented instantly. Then it came again. Valrek didn't fight it with strength. He fought it with scent. He opened the gland still burning in his neck, forced his damaged body to release everything it had left, flooding the chamber with a feral, chaotic alpha signature, spiked with blood and grief and unfiltered madness. The clone staggered, Oriath shouted, but Valrek held his gaze, voice shaking. Run. No. I said run, Oriath, but Oriath didn't move. He couldn't. He watched, helpless, as Valrek drew the thing toward the back of the temple. It followed not for logic, but because it was drowning in Valrek's scent, baited, maddened, cornered. Valrek disappeared into the crumbling corridor beyond the altar. And then, the explosion came like thunder cracking bone. Flame, stone, light. The temple roof gave way. Oriath screamed, diving back, but too late. The world splintered. Smoke roared into his lungs. A support pillar cracked above him. He ducked, stumbled, but the heat came from everywhere. The roar of collapse swallowed all sound. And Valrek, gone. He didn't know how long he lay there, pinned beneath debris, skin scraped raw, breath tasting of ash. When the hands came, they weren't Valrek's. They were gloved, clinical, Lucian's people. Oriath was too dazed to fight. His throat was raw from smoke and shouting. He only remembered the sound of rubble falling and Valrek's body disappearing in flame. They dragged him into the black transport, injected him with a stabilizer. He didn't resist. He couldn't. But when Lucian's voice filtered in through the calm, cool and amused, Oriath's broken whisper still found its way through the pain. If I can't destroy you, he said, I'll destroy myself. Lucian chuckled softly. But darling, that's exactly what I'm counting on. The new chamber wasn't a room. It was a cocoon. Oriath floated in warm fluid, his wrists and ankles bound in surgical harnesses. Tubes connected to his neck, his lower spine, his gland. Sensors blinked along the walls, monitoring hormonal fluctuations, brainwave disruptions, dream responses. Lucian stood on the other side of the glass. His silhouette was sharp, immaculate. Phase 2, he murmured, almost reverently. No alpha, no variables, just the source, pure, untainted. Oriath's eyes opened slowly beneath the surface. He didn't flinch, didn't panic, but Lucian knew the cracks had begun. He smiled. You were only the prelude, he said. Destruction hasn't even started. Beneath the ruins, the fire smoldered for hours. Then, rubble shifted, stone fell, and something inside the wreckage moved. One bloodied hand clawed free from the ash. Valrek wasn't dead, but something in him had changed. Not broken, not lost, reforged, and far, far from sane. Chapter 21. The Omega they rebuilt was not me. Light filtered through a pane of reinforced glass, sterile and cold, the color of watered-down bleach. Oriath sat suspended in fluid once again, his body slick with synthetic hormones, his veins lined with invisible threads of influence. The walls of the chamber were white, too white, like no memory could ever cling to them. Lucian stood beyond the pane, hands clasped behind his back, immaculate in his ash-gray coat. At his side was Evia, a tall alpha woman with sharp cheekbones and eyes like razors, Lucian's new assistant. Where Lucian was precision, Evia was pressure. She carried authority like a loaded weapon. He's more docile today, Evia noted, reading from the biometric tablet. Pulse stable, cortisol levels dropping. He responded to the third memory loop with less resistance. Lucian's eyes didn't move from Oriath's face. Keep the Valrek sequence running. Yes, sir. Inside the tank, Oriath blinked slowly, air bubbles curling from the rebreather over his mouth. He wasn't sure how many days had passed. Not that it mattered. Time in here didn't run forward. It spiraled backward, sideways into unreality. In his dreams, Valrek kissed him beneath blood moons. In his dreams, Valrek collared him with trembling hands. In his dreams, Valrek whispered, "You belong to me. You always have." The memories were soft, almost holy. But Oriath didn't trust them. He remembered kneeling. That part was true. But had he begged for the collar, or screamed to be free of it? He remembered Valrek's voice breaking. But was it love, or was it guilt? They'd rebuilt his pain into a movie reel, looped and edited, until he couldn't tell which parts had been real and which had been mercy. When he awoke from the last hallucination, a soft voice echoed in the chamber. Not from the speakers, from the corner. He turned his head. There it stood, the failed copy. A pale echo of himself, half-fleshed, half-shadow. No eyes, just black sockets that glistened like open wounds. I remember when he kissed me too, it said, voice like a child underwater. He said I was the only thing keeping him sane. That's not true, Oriath whispered. Isn't it? The copy cocked its head. You think you were different. You think you were special. But you knelt just like I did. You screamed just like I did. You bled just like I did. I chose to stay, Oriath rasped. He gave me a choice. No, the copy said, stepping closer to the glass. He gave you a collar, and you wore it like salvation. Oriath slammed his fist against the chamber wall. You don't get to take this from me. The copy only smiled. Pain is not proof of love, Oriath. It's just proof that they broke you in the right place. When they pulled him from the tank, his body was shaking, but not from cold. Lucian stood waiting with a white towel and a gentleness that made Oriath want to vomit. There, Lucian said, as if speaking to a child. We've scrubbed out the parts that hurt. You'll feel better now. Clearer. Oriath's fingers curled around the towel like it was a weapon. You can't erase what I feel. No, Lucian agreed. But I can redefine it. They led him to the memory installation chamber. Screens lit up along the walls, flickering with images of Valrek, bleeding, broken, holding him like something sacred, repeating, I saved you, I saved you, I saved you. His voice, recorded and filtered, poured through the speakers like a prayer. You came to me, you begged to be mine. I kept you safe. I chose you. Oriath fell to his knees. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stared as the voices grew louder, louder, until he could no longer remember which part of it had happened, and which part had only been planted to make him stay. Evia crouched beside him, voice almost tender. Your bond is nothing but muscle memory. Let it fade. Let us help you be what you were meant to be. Oriath whispered. And what's that? A perfect Omega, she said. Loyal, grateful, obedient. He closed his eyes, and did not resist when the collar was buckled around his neck once again. Later that night, in the mirrorless room where they now kept him, he sat motionless on the floor. The copy had returned. It stood against the far wall, head tilted. Do you feel it? It whispered. The world shifting under you? I don't feel anything, Oriath said. That's the point. The copy nodded. Good. Then you're ready. For what? For the end. Oriath looked up slowly. His eyes were dull now. No fire. No defiance. You don't get to take my pain, he said again, though it sounded more like a question than a command. It's all I have left to prove he loved me. The copy only turned and walked through the wall, vanishing, leaving Oriath alone. From the upper levels of the cold court tower, Lucian watched through the surveillance feed. He smiled to himself. Proceed with terminal pheromone seeding, he said to Evia. The limbic network has been destabilized. His emotional pathways are soft enough now. The next trial begins tomorrow. And the alpha? Lucian didn't turn. Valrek is no longer relevant. Far away, across a field of frost and blood, a figure stumbled through the snow, half naked, eyes wild. One arm dragged useless behind him. Valrek's scent was broken. His voice was gone. But in his mind, there was one name carved into the ruins of his sanity. Oriath. He whispered it like a curse, like a prayer, like a promise, and he kept walking. Chapter 22. The Alpha Who Forgot His Own Name. Snow whispered through the ruin of the old world. He lay half-buried beneath shattered marble and scorched steel, his breath misting against the bitter cold. His skin was torn, marked with burns that pulsed like stars, and his obsidian wine hair had matted with frost. The only thing that moved was his chest, slow, defiant inhales. He didn't know how long he had been there, didn't know his name, didn't know why. In the dark of his own mind, he kept whispering, "I was left. That was all. Not who, not what, just the void where meaning should be, clogged with something black and churning. Rage without a cause, grief without a source. He should have died. But something in him, something monstrous, refused. The wind cracked, and a figure stepped from the mist, robes like falling stars, skin pale as a dying moon, eyes dark and patient. Valor Astareth knelt beside the half-frozen Alpha, his hands gentle, almost reverent. "You always come back in pieces, don't you, Valrek?" The name didn't spark anything in the Alpha's face. He only blinked slowly. Valor sighed and traced a fingertip along Valrek's temple. "I warned you. The bond was too deep, too fast, too wild. And now you've lost yourself for the price of a boy who was never yours." The boy. Vague images flickered, warmth against a cold collarbone, a breathless laugh, the scent of flowers in the rain, then screams, fire, silence. "Where is he?" Valrek croaked. Valor tilted his head. "Who?" "The Omega." "Ah." Valor smiled with a softness too polished to be real. "He's gone. He chose the one who made you like this. Lucian." The word struck Valrek like a blade. "Your Omega betrayed you, my prince," Valor murmured. "He never looked back. He chose comfort over you. And now you're a ruin." Something flared deep in Valrek's chest. He sat up sharply, gasping. "I'll kill them." "Yes," Valor said. "But first, let me help you remember why." The Starspire Tower was older than the current world. Its walls were made of night silver, veins of ancient magic crawling along the surface like frost patterns. At its heart sat a mind forge, the Astareth family's greatest secret, the Psychial Rift, a place where memory could be shattered, rearranged, or burned clean. Valrek stood in the center, shirtless, his back crisscrossed with scars, his eyes vacant. Around him, visions bloomed like poisonous flowers. In one, he saw Oriath smiling, holding Lucian's hand. In another, Oriath's voice whispered against another man's skin. Then laughter, then begging. "Please, Lucian, don't stop." "No," Valrek growled, but the images clung, worming through the cracks in his mind. "You were just another experiment to him," Valor said from the observation chamber above, his tone deceptively soothing. "He let you think you were needed, but when it mattered, he chose power. He always would." "I don't believe it," Valrek muttered, clenching his fists. "You already do," Valor said gently. "I'm only showing you what's true." Inside the rift, Valrek screamed. The floor split beneath him. Blood and memories poured together, visions of Oriath bound in glass, reaching for someone else, smiling through the pain that Valrek had tried to pull him from, and in the end walking away, not with Valrek, but with the enemy. His bones ached, his glands burned. Pheromones leaked from his skin in crystalline droplets that hit the ground and hissed like acid. His eyes darkened, pupils blown wide, irises pulsing between wine red and void black. He threw his head back and roared. The tower shook, Sensors exploded. Valor watched, unmoving, as Valrek collapsed to one knee, panting, body steaming with the birth of something ancient. The Alpha's glands had begun to mutate, regressing, shifting into something from the bloodlines that predated civilization. "Very good," Valor whispered. "Now you're beginning to see." In the aftermath, Valrek's voice was hoarse. "He left me. I gave him everything." Valor descended the stairs, robes dragging like shadows. He knelt before Valrek and cupped his chin. "Yes, and he spat on it. I want to end it. Then go to Ashvale Cold Court," Valor said, planting the seed with serpentine patience. "There's something waiting for you there. The truth, perhaps, or vengeance." Valrek stood slowly, eyes still wild. "I'll burn every piece of him that's left in me." And he walked out into the night. From the far side of the frost-choked range, Narek, young lord of Ashvale Cold Court, watched Valrek's emergence with narrowed eyes. He stood beside one of Lucien's many projection mirrors, cloaked in velvet and disdain. He survived. Of course he did. Lucien's voice crackled through the device. "Let him come. A beast without purpose always runs in circles. Eventually, he'll lead us back to the flame." Narek's lip curled. "And the Omega?" Lucien's chuckle was thin and sweet. "Ready. Finally." Beneath Cold Court, in a chamber pulsing with quiet blue light, Oriath lay motionless in a containment bed. His body still, lips parted just enough to show his uneven breathing. Lucien leaned over him, hand pressed flat to the boy's bare chest. "You're beautiful like this," he whispered. "Soft, blank." Then he snapped his fingers. A spark of electricity shivered through the chamber. Oriath's eyes opened, empty, obedient. Lucien smiled and leaned in close. "Would you like to see him?" he purred. "The Alpha who said he'd destroy everything that ever reminded him of you?" Oriath didn't answer, but deep inside, something ancient began to stir. Not love, not hate, something crueler, something waiting. Chapter 23. A kiss between the blade and the lie. The mirror hall shimmered with silvery light, a vast and echoing chamber of glass and fractured reflections. Ashvale Cold Court's experimental tower had no windows, only illusions projected from the minds of those trapped within. Every mirrored panel absorbed pheromones, refracted memory, bent reality into what Lucien wanted most. Now, the air was thick with tension and salt and something that burned like heartbreak left too long in the dark. Oriath stood barefoot in the center of the hall, wearing white hospital linen that clung damply to his skin. His arms hung loose at his sides, but there was something different in his posture. Too still, too quiet, like a candle on the edge of going out. Subject F-07 released. The intercom crackled, emotionless. Initiate phase confrontation. From the opposite archway, heavy boots struck the ground with rhythm and weight. Valrek emerged from shadow like a specter summoned to kill a part of himself. His coat was black, his collar stained with dried blood. The scar at his temple burned like molten ink. They froze when they saw each other. For one breath, two. A beat that could have been relief. Then Valrek's lips curled, not with joy, but disdain. "So," he said, voice flat, cold, poisoned, "this is what you've become." Oriath didn't blink. "You knew what I was all along." Valrek took a step closer, hands curling into fists. "Don't flatter yourself. I didn't know you were this easy to reprogram." The words hit harder than fists. Oriath said nothing. "Not at first." Valrek's voice cut sharper. "He fucked your brain, didn't he? Lucien whispered sweet things, and you just fell into his lap like a good little Omega." Oriath's lips trembled, but he steadied. "Is that what you believe?" "I believe I should have ended this when I had the chance." Valrek's eyes glowed with pheromone-induced heat. I should have crushed your throat the moment I realized you were too soft to survive. Oriath's throat worked around a swallowed breath. He took one step forward, then another. Valrek didn't move. I'm not who you remember, Oriath whispered, stopping just short of touching distance. And maybe I never was. Maybe I was always just a mistake you didn't regret enough to bury. You think this is guilt? Valrek barked a laugh, harsh and bright. You're not worth guilt. You're a failed hypothesis. A ghost in someone else's fantasy. There was silence. Then Oriath said, in a voice so soft it broke like paper, "You're right." He raised the dagger he'd stolen from a medical tray. Valrek's eyes widened, not in fear, but disbelief. Oriath didn't lunge. He turned the blade inward. "You don't have to kill me," he said. "I already did that myself." And he drove the blade toward his own heart. Valrek moved before he thought. The blade sliced across Oriath's chest, not deep enough to kill, but enough to spray warmth between them, red and sudden. Oriath crumpled forward into Valrek's arms, trembling, gasping. "You idiot!" Valrek snarled, catching him before he hit the floor. Oriath smiled through the pain. "Now maybe you can forget me without regret." Blood soaked the linen. Valrek clutched him tighter. His rage blurred into something wordless, something feral. "You want to die so badly?" He hissed into Oriath's ear. "Fine, but not like this. Not his way." "I never wanted to die," Oriath whispered. "I just didn't want to be rewritten." Valrek's breath hitched. The lie fractured. A memory flickered. Oriath's laugh. Soft fingers curled around his wrist in the garden. The whisper of lips at his neck. "Valrek, I never wanted to be anywhere but here." He staggered back, cradling Oriath like glass. He choked. "I don't know what's real anymore." Oriath's eyes began to roll back. And Valrek knew the knife hadn't been meant to kill. It had been meant to sever. The bond. The hope. Everything. "No, stay awake," Valrek shouted. "Stay with me." "Damn it, Oriath." Above them, behind the one-way glass, Lucien observed silently. His fingers tapped in a satisfied rhythm. "He's ready," he said to no one in particular. Beside him, Valor stood motionless. His face unreadable, but his eyes flicked toward the collapsing alpha below with something dangerously close to pity. In the mirror hall, the lights dimmed. Oriath's breathing grew shallow. Valrek pressed his forehead to Oriath's, desperation making his voice raw. "I hated you for leaving." A pause. A sob. "I hated myself more for letting you go." Oriath didn't answer, until, just before losing consciousness, he whispered something Valrek barely caught. "I didn't blame you." And then he was gone. Lucien turned away from the glass. "Begin the integration," he ordered. Technicians scrambled. Doors opened. Oriath's limp body was lifted onto a platform, blood trailing behind like red ribbons on snow. Valrek remained kneeling, alone in a hall of mirrors. His reflection fractured, twisted, unrecognizable. He reached for his own face, as if trying to peel off whatever was left of the lie. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a door began to splinter. Chapter 24, The Omega Who Should Have Died. The first thing Oriath felt was heat, soft, golden, almost gentle. The second was pain, threaded through his nerves like thin silver wires. The third was the collar around his throat tightening as if it were breathing for him. He wasn't sure if he was alive, or if this was the moment just before dying. The fusion chamber of Ashvale Cold Court pulsed like an open heart, every wall lined with glowing conduits of pheromone-rich mist. Ancient symbols, half wolf, half something older, shifted across the floor like serpents etched in fire. He was strapped to a slab of translucent crystal. His wrists bound, his ankles locked, his chest bare beneath the piercing lights. Tubes wormed from his veins into the machinery above him, carrying pale luminescent liquid that smelled like flowers burning at midnight. Lucian stood over him, his white gloves immaculate, his gaze bright with hunger. "Look at you," he murmured. "Perfect even in collapse." Oriath's breath hitched. "Stop." Lucian tilted his head as though amused by the idea of mercy. "You are the conduit of a god," he said softly. "The forgotten link to the old Omega genome. What you call suffering, I call awakening." He pressed a hand flat against Oriath's sternum. Oriath felt his heart falter. "You shouldn't exist," Lucian whispered reverently. "And yet you do. The first successful carrier of moonblood since the collapse of the old world. Veldenmoor wasn't just a name. It was a prophecy. Lights flared above them. The resonance machine roared to life. The world blurred. Oriath's consciousness, the fragile thread holding his sense of self together, began to fray. He drifted through a void. Numb. Weightless. His body was somewhere far away. But his mind floated like pollen in a storm. Voices rippled in from the edge of memory. "Run, little flower. Don't cry. Stay. Don't leave me. Don't look back." Then one voice cut through them all, broken and rough. "If you walk away now, I'll still follow." "Valrek," Oriath gasped. Then the void swallowed him again. Lucian's voice pierced the haze. "Begin alignment." The fusion circle beneath the slab ignited, filling the chamber with swirling gold light. Valrek's pheromone resonance imitated, replicated, magnified until the air itself trembled. "Once your heart synchronizes with the eternal pheromone well," Lucian continued, "every alpha on this continent will be connected to me, controlled, corrected." He dragged a fingertip down Oriath's cheek. "You will free them from their instincts by erasing their wills." Oriath tried to turn his head away. Lucian caught his jaw with a gloved hand. "You don't get to look away, darling. You exist to be seen." The machine released a pulse of searing heat. Oriath screamed. His body arched violently, the bindings cutting into his skin. Light burst behind his eyes, white, then blue, then red. He felt something twist inside his chest, a hook tugging him toward a place that wasn't human. He saw a landscape of silver sand, a moon split in half, a shrine carved into his bones. He heard whispers in a language that had no sound. Veldenmoor, moonblood, conduit, sacrifice. Then, a memory rose from the darkness. Not a false one, not a hallucination, a true one. Valrek kneeling behind him in the bath, steam curling in the dim candlelight, his fingers tracing Oriath's collarbone as if memorizing each ridge. His voice low, fierce, scared in a way he'd never admit. "If you ever want to walk away, I won't stop you. But don't ask me to pretend I won't miss you." Oriath's heart slammed against his ribs. He remembered. Valrek had never asked for obedience, had never demanded worship. He had demanded presence. Oriath's breath shook. Lucian frowned. "Subject heart rate is spiking." "Why?" Evia looked up from the control panel. "Residual emotion remains." His memory wipe wasn't complete. Lucian's eyes narrowed. He shouldn't retain anything. Oriath forced a whisper through the burning in his throat. "Because I chose him." Lucian's face twisted in disgust. "No," he hissed. "You chose nothing. You were built, designed, scripted." Oriath lifted his head despite the weight of the restraints. And softly, almost tenderly, he said, "If I can't even keep my own memories, then I'm already dead." Lucian's expression soured. Evia stepped back, uneasy. The fusion process buckled. Energy spat from the conduits. Alarms wailed. Subject destabilizing. Evia shouted. Lucian snarled. Increase calibration. It'll kill him. Lucian grabbed the scalpel from the tray. Then at least he dies useful. The blade glinted above Oriath's heart. Oriath closed his eyes. I'm sorry, Valrek. The floor shook. A sound tore through the chamber. No machine, no human voice, no natural force could have made it. It was primal. It was furious. It was alpha. The wall exploded. Shards of stone and glass showered the air. Metal pipes bent inward like crushed tin. The lights flickered, then burst. Valrek stepped through the smoke, half naked, bleeding from a dozen wounds. His eyes molten black and burning like twin eclipses. Not quite wolf, not quite man. Something older, something reborn. His pheromones hit the chamber like a blade, shattering every illusion, every tether, every calculated resonance. Technicians collapsed instantly. Evia dropped to her knees, choking. Lucian staggered back, staring in disbelief. Impossible. You shouldn't be able to. Valrek didn't speak. He roared. The sound cracked the resonance chamber, splitting the floor. Pipes burst. Alchemical fluid erupted in geysers. The machine shattered. Valrek's voice finally came, low and murderous. You don't get to touch him. Oriath sobbed, part terror, part relief, part something too raw to name. Lucian lifted the scalpel again, desperation for the first time in his voice. He's the conduit. He belongs to. Valrek lunged. Lucian barely dodged. Valrek planted himself between Lucian and the slab, pheromones swirling around him like a storm, like a crown of knives. Oriath reached toward him with trembling fingers. Valrek caught his hand, his own shaking, eyes frantic. You're not allowed to die, he whispered. Not while I'm still breathing. Oriath choked out a laugh, broken and small. You remembered? No, Valrek said, voice shaking, not with anger, but with truth. I felt you, and I came back for that alone. Behind them, something stirred in the cracked fusion tube, a hybrid creature of pheromone and flesh, the failed final form Lucian had tried to birth. It rose. Lucian smiled, blood running down his chin. You're too late. Valrek slowly turned, shielding Oriath with his own body. His eyes burned with ancient fire. War was about to begin. Chapter 25, The Alpha Who Was Never Free. The world around them was burning. Ashvale Cold Court trembled beneath Valrek's boots, its once imposing tower fracturing under the weight of betrayal and unholy ambition. The flames licked the crumbling stone like hungry beasts, devouring what remained of Lucian's empire of madness. But Valrek didn't see fire, didn't hear the crumbling of walls or the agonized shrieks of soldiers who had sworn allegiance to the wrong god. All he saw was the boy in his arms, too light, too still, the pale bloom of Oriath's body wrapped in the shreds of a torn medical gown, skin glistening with remnants of invasive machines and the cruel sheen of half-coagulated blood. He should have been dead, but he wasn't. Not yet. Valrek's heart was a broken metronome, hammering a desperate, a rhythmic pulse through his temple. His body was ruined. His information sent unstable and feral, turned into a weapon against his own kind. But it didn't matter. He would burn through the marrow of this world if it meant keeping Oriath breathing. He kicked open the heavy steel gate to the lower chamber, Lucian's bioengineered womb of horrors. The underground was rotting with the stench of half-formed clones and discarded organs, all humming with an eerie pulse, a ghostly rhythm synchronized to a heartless god. Tanks of glowing fluid lined the walls, silhouettes drifting inside them, creations aborted mid-experiment. their mouths forever open in silent screams. Valrek didn't flinch. He stepped over the corpses, past the shattered lab monitors and sparking wires, until he reached the central platform where Lucian stood, calm and scathed, elegant even in the eye of annihilation. "You're still breathing?" Lucian said smoothly, voice like silk soaked in venom. "I underestimated your bond." How poetic. The Alpha returns to his fallen Omega. Shall we weep now or later? Valrek didn't speak. His grip tightened around Oriath's limp frame. He could still feel the faint pulse beneath the delicate skin of his throat. Still warm. Still his. "You won't take him again," Valrek growled, voice raw from smoke and grief and rage. His pupils were blown wide, blood veining the whites of his eyes. "You won't touch him." Lucian smiled. "You think I want to touch him anymore?" Valrek, "Darling, he's already mine. The seed was sown long ago. What you carry in your arms isn't love, it's failure. A half-molded dream of salvation. A fantasy that should have been purged the night you branded him." Valrek bared his teeth. "Say another word. I dare you." Lucian's fingers danced over the crystalline console embedded in the floor. "You're not the hero here. You never were. You were my best failure. My masterpiece of predictable rebellion. You always wanted to save someone because you were the one who needed saving. Tell me, how does it feel, knowing your love destroyed him?" Valrek screamed. It wasn't a sound. It was a rupture, something primeval and absolute. A wave of scent and sound and psychic fire exploded from his body, shattering the tanks around them. Fluid and flesh and screaming steel flew like shrapnel. The entire chamber dimmed, shadows writhing as if in agony. And in the epicenter, Valrek knelt, pressing his forehead to Oriath's cold one. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice breaking. "I'm sorry I didn't get to be better. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from me." He brushed a kiss against Oriath's temple, feather light, reverent, as if his mouth might set him ablaze. "I thought I was free," he said, "but I was never anything except what they made me. And now I will unmake them." Lucian's laughter echoed like bells of a funeral procession. "Then die with your mistake, Valrek." He pressed the final key. Above, the tower groaned. A chain reaction began to ripple through the structure, each floor detonating in a rising crescendo of destruction. Light flooded downward like divine punishment. The ground cracked open. Flames spiraled up like the hands of forgotten gods. Valrek stood. He looked at Lucian, eyes no longer mad but ancient, full of something that had never belonged to a man. "You built this empire on my blood," he said. "Now drown in it." He turned, holding Oriath close, and leapt into the pit of light. Lucian shouted something. The rest was fire. The world shattered. For a moment, nothing. Then, silence. Ashvale Cold Court collapsed like a dying star, burying its secrets beneath a mountain of molten steel and ash. Smoke painted the horizon black. The forest at the border wilted from the heat, and the once sacred sky bore no moon to mourn its children. But at the center of the ruin, untouched by the fire's rage, lay a crater, and in it, cradled like a prayer between death and destiny, two figures. One Alpha, whose scent had become pure flame. One Omega, whose heart refused to stop beating. Chapter 26. The day the moon burned black. The world was not supposed to sound like this. The Ashvale ruin screamed, metal shrieking into the night, shards of collapsed towers still glowing red as if the moon itself had bled onto the stone. Smoke curled upward in slow, sacred spirals, turning the sky into a curtain of ash. The Cold Court banners, once sharp and proud, now hung in tatters like flayed skin. At the center of the crater, where Valrek had leapt with Oriath into Lucian's suicidal light, there was no body, no breath, No blood. Only a single thread of pale luminescence, drifting through the air like the ghost of a flower petal. Valrek fell to his knees, hands digging into the ruined earth until his claws cracked stone. Oriath. Nothing answered. Then, a voice, soft as dew sliding off a dying rose. Valrek. He froze. The light gathered in front of him, swirling, trembling, forming the vague silhouette of a boy with downcast eyes and hair like faint moonlight. Not solid, not alive, but there. Oriath, or what remained of him. Valrek reached out, but his fingers passed through the figure like water through smoke. Oriath's soul flickered. I'm sorry. My body is gone. Valrek's chest split with a pain so sharp it nearly took him unconscious. He tried to speak around it. I'll find you. I'll fix this. You can't, Oriath whispered. I'm not meant to be put back together. Valrek bared his teeth. I don't care what you're meant for. But before he could rise, the sky ripped open. A beam of white fire plunged down into the crater, carving a perfect circle around them. The remaining Ashvale soldiers, those warped by Lucien's early experiments, fell to their knees the moment the light touched their skin. And from that impossible radiance a figure stepped out. Lucien. But not the Lucien they knew. His body had become a vessel of spiraling glyphs and glowing veins. Thousands of Omega voices whispered beneath his skin, a choir of stolen breaths. Eyes burned silver, as if he'd swallowed the moon. He had become the moonburn god. Every alpha in the region fell under his shadow, glands stuttering, instincts collapsing beneath the pressure of a command older than language. Valrek felt the pull, a summons, a leash, but Lucien's voice cut deeper than any psychic tether. Stand, Valrek, or kneel. You were always made to obey. Valrek rose, slowly, deliberately, and smirked. Kneel, he echoed, rolling his neck. I don't kneel for the fool who killed my Omega. Lucien's eyelids lowered. Omega? That fragment. He nodded toward Oriath's shimmering form. He is no longer even flesh, just residue of a memory that should have died. His smile sharpened. Just like your mother. Valrek's scent detonated. A shockwave of pheromone force struck the crater walls, shattering boulders, sending Ashvale soldiers sprawling. His eyes darkened into pits of black flame, and the ancient wolf blood inside him surged up with a fury that vibrated the air. He took a step forward. Careful, God, Valrek growled. Even divinity bleeds. Lucien flicked his fingers. Valrek's body collapsed as every nerve screamed. Lucien was controlling his bloodstream, choking him with his own instincts. Oriath rushed toward him, soul flickering violently. Stop! He can't fight you like this. Lucien laughed, voice fracturing into 1,000 harmonics. He has no choice. Every alpha is bound to me now. His gaze cut to Valrek. Even you. Valrek gasped, claws scraping the dirt, muscles spasming. Lucien's energy crawled through his veins like barbed wire. You are not an enemy, Lucien murmured. You are my dog, and you will die when I command it. Valrek lifted his head with effort that nearly tore him apart. Funny, he rasped, because even a dog will bite if you touch what's his. Oriath's soul pulsed. Valrek, let go. Forget me. You don't need. Valrek snarled so loud the air broke. Don't say that. Oriath flinched. Valrek stood, shaking, bleeding from the nose and eyes. You think I can forget you? You think I want to? His voice cracked into a roar. What made you believe I had that kind of strength? Oriath's eyes shimmered. You deserve to live without my shadow. No, Valrek said, stepping forward, scent burning like dark wildfire. I deserve to love who I choose. And I choose you, Even if you're just light and memory and pain. Oriath trembled. I'm not real anymore. Valrek took his trembling soul hand. You are to me. Lucien's expression twisted. Pathetic. He lifted both hands. The ground opened beneath Valrek's feet. Oriath screamed as Lucien began altering Valrek's glandular system, rewriting him from the inside, forcing every alpha instinct to turn inward. Valrek, stop. You'll die. Valrek looked at Oriath, really looked, and smiled. Then I die with your name on my bones. He raised his hand, claws gleaming, and pressed them against the base of his own throat. Lucien's eyes widened. What are you? Breaking the leash, Valrek growled. Oriath's soul shook violently. Valrek, no? Valrek whispered, voice shaking with devotion and fury. For him, I can even destroy fate. And he drove his claws straight into his own alpha gland. Blood exploded in a dark crimson arc. The bond shattered like thunder. Lucien screamed. Chapter 27. To kill the alpha, I had to love him first. He fell. Not just onto the blackened floor of the Ashvale ruins, but inward, through smoke and memory, through the broken lattice of his own ruined bloodline. Valrek choked on the scent of his own burning pheromones. Where once his essence had carried seduction and dominion, it now reeked of death and ash, a wildfire spiraling into the core of his bones. His body trembled as the rupture of his alpha gland bled light. Not blood, a cursed light, flickering like the last ember of a star collapsing into itself. The world had gone silent. No more screams. No more Lucien. No more Oriath. Except a voice. You once kissed me like fire. I still remember. Valrek's fingers clawed into the scorched stone, twitching. He was on his knees, half his spine seared raw, but he knew that voice. Knew it even if he'd been born blind and buried in ice. Oriath, he rasped, lips cracked, throat torn from too many roars. Is that you? No one answered aloud. But then there he was, a shimmer in the smoke, a mirage made of moonlight and grief. Oriath stood barefoot in the ruins of Valrek's mind, not as flesh, but as memory. Not whole but not gone. Why are you still here? Valrek whispered, his throat raw with unshed mourning. Because you're still burning. The answer didn't come from the outside. It bloomed from within. He clenched his fists. You should have left. You should have gone when I did. The voice echoed in him. And you dragged me back. Every time. Valrek's vision blurred. His heart was breaking inwards, its fragments scraping across years of madness. Lust, violence. Every word Lucien had carved into his brain felt like a brand now. Feral, untamable, failure, freak. But Oriath had never said that. Oriath had called him Valrek. Not monster, not curse. I remember, Valrek croaked. I remember kissing you in the garden. Your lips were trembling. You asked me if I wanted something real. And you laughed. Oriath finished for him, and said you didn't believe in real. Valrek let his bloodied hand fall to the floor. I was wrong. And just like that, Valor stepped from the shadows. The astrologer's coat was torn, his gloves smudged with stardust and blood. His pale gaze flicked over Valrek's shattered body with an unreadable expression. You were never meant to survive this long, Valor said, kneeling beside him. You should have died with your gland. But your bloodline won't go quietly. Valrek lifted his head slowly. You knew. Yes. Valor's voice was gentle. Lucien envied you. Not for your cruelty. For your purity. That blood of yours, the untainted alpha inheritance. That's why he started this war. Valrek stared at him, eyes bloodshot and rimmed with salt. He made me a monster. No, Valor corrected softly. He gave you the tools. You made yourself into something that could survive him. Then why? Because he was afraid of you? Valor said, voice tightening. Afraid you'd find someone who loved you despite the beast he unleashed. Valrek looked away. His chest rose and fell with a trembling that no longer belonged to rage. He won. Oriath is gone. No, Valor said. He's still here. I can feel him in you. And that terrifies Lucian more than anything. Valrek closed his eyes. For a moment, the quiet lingered like frost. Then Lucian's voice shattered it. You think love will save you? The god thing's voice boomed from the wreckage above, descending like a judgment. Your Omega is a soul fragment now, a whisper. He can't even touch you. And you, Valrek, you're bleeding out on sacred soil. I am the future. Your bond is nothing but a failed experiment. Valrek dragged himself upright, bones grinding. He was barely a man anymore, more smoke than flesh, more scar than skin. But he stood and spoke. You're right. Lucian paused. I am dying. Valrek's voice shook with the weight of something deeper than pain. And he's not here. Not really. But he's also never left me. From the ruins behind him, a soft blue glow began to pulse. Oriath's last resonance. Trembling, waiting. Valrek looked up at the sky. The moon hung there, burnt black, eclipsed by the very tower they had destroyed. You want to know what madness looks like? Valrek asked softly. It's not the screams, not the fire. It's knowing someone loved you, and you broke them anyway. Lucian sneered. Touching, truly. But tell me, what are you going to do now, lover boy? Die and rot? Or beg me to bring your little Omega back? Valrek didn't answer. Instead, he turned toward the memory light that still flickered behind him. I'm sorry, he whispered. He took a breath, then plunged his clawed hand into his own abdomen, ripping the last threads of alpha stability apart. His blood ignited like starlight, and a howl tore from his throat, not of rage, not even grief, but of surrender, to love, to loss, to everything Oriath had been. The air cracked. Lucian stepped back. No! The ruins glowed. The stars stuttered. Valrek collapsed forward, his body caving in like a dying star, his chest hollowed by the one truth he could no longer contain. I loved him, he whispered, even when I shouldn't have. And somewhere, beyond the veil, Oriath's voice answered. Then you never really lost me. Chapter 28. The mate bond was never meant to save us. The moon was bleeding. Above the scorched ruins of Moonbrand Apex, where the ancestral stones of the old king's bloodline still whispered madness into the wind, a god was being born. Lucian stood at the heart of it all. Not a man now, no longer flesh, nor wolf. He hovered midair, radiant with a lattice of silver and crimson veins, each one pulsing with stolen blood and corrupted desire. His voice was no longer a voice, it was law. It was programming. I am the origin, he said, and every ruined wall echoed it back. I am what made you. What will unmake you? Below him, Valrek knelt, barely conscious, but breathing. Breathing only because Oriath had spoken his name. Oriath, a being not yet whole, not flesh, not light, not soul, but becoming. Across the tower's fractured span, a figure formed, naked in essence, glowing with memory, flickering like a lantern in stormlight. Oriath's reconstructed shape bore none of the fragility he once carried. He was made of longing now, and choice. I never belonged in your world, Oriath said softly. The words didn't pass through the air. They passed through Valrek, through the burning shell of him. But I stayed because you looked at me like I was more than prey. Valrek's head lifted, His mouth bled when he smiled. I looked at you like you were everything. Lucian's sneer cracked the sky. Romance, he spat. Biological obsession dressed in poetry. Mate bonds were never love. They were chains, tools. I only refined what was always there. He raised a hand, and the sky screamed. Networks of God-coded pheromones flashed to life, a global nerve web of control. Alpha glands responded. Omega receptors spasmed. Even Valrek, who had broken himself open to be free, twitched in agony. You see, Lucian said, even without a body, your instincts still kneel. But Oriath stood straight. I'm not here because of instinct, he said, stepping forward, each step leaving a glowing footprint on the shattered tower. I came back because I chose to. Valrek tried to rise, and this time he did. Slowly, bones screaming. You're not real, Lucian said, watching Oriath with dawning unease. You're just a memory echo. You can't be here. Not without a body. I gave that up, Oriath said. To save him. A pause. Then Oriath reached out, not to Valrek, but to the invisible bond thread between them. That raw, burning cord made of every kiss, every fight. Every time Oriath had whispered Valrek's name like it was his only prayer. The bond flared. Oriath's fingers brushed it, and light exploded. Valrek howled, not in pain but in recognition. He saw the hidden structure beneath the bond. Not desire, not hormonal command, but sacrifice. Buried beneath the instinct was something Lucian never understood. Oriath's voice reached him again. The mark was never meant to save us. It was made so we could choose who we'd burn for. I choose you, Valrek whispered. Even if I never remember this, Oriath said. Even if I forget your name tomorrow, I'll still find you. Valrek stepped into him. Lucian roared, now truly afraid. You'll die. Both of you will die. You think memory matters more than design? You think love can reprogram me? Valrek kissed Oriath. Not like before. Not with hunger. Not with fury. But with reverence. It was soft. Desperate. Final. Then, Valrek raised his hand and placed it against Oriath's chest. The bond glowed, flared, then tore open. A surge of heat crashed through the tower like a second sun. Alpha glands ignited. Omega receptors short-circuited. The entire pheromone lattice of Lucian's control web shuddered as Valrek and Oriath channeled the full, terminal force of their mate bond into the neural core of the god. Lucian screamed, his body rupturing into spirals of data and blood, the stolen bloodlines unraveling in 1,000 directions. Oriath held on. Valrek held him. Lucian tried to descend, to reach them, his god form breaking apart like glass. But it was too late. Valrek looked at Oriath. Jump with me. Oriath nodded. Even as his form shimmered, memory already beginning to fade from his eyes. They turned, and together, they leapt from the edge of the Moonbrand apex. Below them, the pheromone storm cracked open the world. It was not a clean death. It was not peaceful, but it was theirs. Silence afterward. A long, echoing silence. Then, ash. And then, a single flower. Tiny. Blooming from a crack in the stone. The petals were pale, dusty blue. A species once grown in a back alley garden behind Oriath's flower stall. Footsteps approached. A shadow knelt. A hand reached toward the bloom. Then, a soft voice. Uncertain. Hello, Valrek. I'm? Chapter 29, The Memory of What We Once Were. Morning in Ashvale Cold Court broke not with fire or thunder, but with the rustle of leaves. The sound of dew slipping from one petal to the next. Where once towers of smoke had marked this place with horror, now silence wrapped it gently in green. Oriath sat on a moss-worn bench under the ivy-laced arbor. cupping a chipped porcelain mug in both hands. He didn't drink from it, he merely held it, as if warmth might fill the hollow of his palms and leak somewhere deeper, somewhere emptier. He had no memories. Not of his name, not of the war, not of who he'd been before the garden. They'd given him one, Oriath, after the delicate lettering found sewn into the hem of the only remaining cloth on his person. Could have been a name, or a brand. No one knew. He had been found curled at the base of the Moonbrand ruins, bones whole, skin pale as snow, lips bloodless but breathing. His eyes opened with no recognition, only the shy wonder of a child watching the world for the first time. Valar Astareth had named him again. Valar had placed him in this refuge he'd built from the ashes of the Cold Court. A garden home for reborn Omegas, a place where those who had been broken by the world could grow again, not as weapons, not as vessels, but simply as living things. Oriath lived among them now. He tended younglings who cried in their sleep and spoke rarely. He smiled only when a flower bloomed. That morning, as sunlight streamed through the arched glass and the wind smelled of early rose, Oriath wandered toward the outer edge of the garden. His hands itched for something to do. Weeds maybe, or fallen petals to collect. He rounded a bend by the lilac bushes and stopped. There was someone kneeling in the soil. A man. Tall, with a worn gardener's apron and calloused fingers buried elbow-deep in the roots of a sickly chrysanthemum. His hair shimmered with a strange wine-black sheen, sun catching on curls like bruised velvet. His sleeves were rolled to the forearms, dirt smudged along his cheek, and yet he looked gentle, not kind necessarily, but tender in the way he moved, like the earth was an old friend and he didn't want to wake it too fast. Oriath tilted his head. "Are you new here?" The man glanced up. His eyes were strange, old, yet unfrightening, the color of smoke with hints of memory trapped beneath. He offered a smile that was more of a breath than a gesture. "No," he said. "I just usually work the south beds." Oriath nodded slowly. He knelt beside him, fingertips brushing the ground. "That one needs drainage stones. Otherwise the roots will rot." "You're right," the man said, and moved aside to make room. "You know flowers?" Oriath blinked. "I think I do." Silence fell between them, pleasant, like shade on a summer day. The man eventually said, "I used to make tea from these. Chrysanthemums. For someone who liked everything too sweet." Oriath smiled faintly. "That sounds familiar." Their fingers brushed as they worked. Not deliberate, not hesitant either. Just natural. Two people tending the same green life. Then Oriath's head tilted toward him. His brows furrowed. His nose twitched slightly. "You," he said low. "You smell." The man didn't move. "Familiar," Oriath finished, almost apologetically. The man looked away, swallowing something invisible. "Maybe in another life." Oriath didn't press, but his eyes lingered, searching the curve of the man's profile, as if he might find an answer there that no one had yet told him he was missing. Later that night, the man returned to a room on the garden's edge. Small, barely furnished. The shelves were lined with pressed herbs and unfinished wooden carvings. He opened a drawer. At the back of it lay a chain, tarnished, bent. The charm it once held was cracked down the center, but its shape still suggested a bond mark. The kind alphas once wore to anchor an imprint that no longer existed. He stared at it for a long time, then closed the drawer again. In the next room, Oriath dreamed. He dreamed of laughter in the dark, of fire and lips and hands tangled in a field of ash, of someone holding him and not letting go even as the world crumbled. A name whispered through him. Valrek. He sat upright in bed, heart racing. The name meant nothing, and yet it hurt, like a scar he couldn't find but knew had once bled him dry. He rose, walked to the door. Outside, the moon was thin and silver. The wind carried the scent of chrysanthemum tea. He walked past sleeping beds, past empty corridors, to the edge of the garden. There, by the gate, stood the man. He turned as Oriath approached. Not startled, not surprised. They stood in the hush, and Oriath, with something trembling in his chest, asked, "Did we ever know each other?" The man looked at him a long time, then said, "Would you believe me if I said I hope we get to now?" Oriath didn't smile, but he didn't walk away. Chapter 30, The Garden Where Love Grew Again. Ashvale Cold Court no longer whispered with the screams of the past. Its iron walls had been reclaimed by ivy, its broken towers softened beneath moss and root. Where once cruelty festered, now the Starfall garden reached out like a wound healed over, not perfect, but alive. The sun filtered through shattered arches, painting mosaics on the soil below. The old war ground had become a place of quiet rebirth. At the edge of it, beneath a crumbling stone archway, Valrek knelt, his fingers dusty with earth, planting a row of soft, petaled sprouts. His hands moved slowly, reverently. Every motion was a ritual. Scoop, press, cover, breathe. Across from him, Oriath crouched beside a bed of early blooms, trimming away dead leaves. His movements were precise, almost delicate, but his expression was distant. Since their conversation at the garden gate, he had stayed close. Watched, helped, spoken little. He didn't remember, but sometimes his fingers lingered too long on a cup of tea. Or he'd glance at Valrek when he thought the other man wasn't looking. Or he'd stop mid-step, brow furrowed, as if some memory passed through him like wind through wheat. Today was like that. The light was golden. The garden buzzed with bees and birdsong. And Oriath stared too long at the scar on Valrek's neck. A pale mark, just under the line of his collar. Jagged and faint. He hadn't asked before. Now his hand rose. Valrek didn't flinch. Oriath's fingertips brushed the skin. And the world fell away. Flashes. Not full memories, just sparks. Snow blinding white, swirling fast. Heat, scorching, not from fire, but from him, from Valrek pressed above him. Their skin marked with glowing trails of scent and flame. A tower, a kiss. The moment their mouths met as the world shattered, and something divine was born in its place. And pain, so much pain, sacrifice, loss, falling. Oriath jerked back, gasping, hand clutching his chest. Valrek reached out instinctively. "Are you all right?" Oriath's eyes were wide. We were." Valrek's throat worked silently. Oriath whispered, "Were we mates?" Silence fell between them like dusk. Valrek sat back on his heels. His face was calm, but there was something behind it, something breaking, something restrained. "Not anymore," he said quietly. Oriath looked stricken. "Why?" "Because you chose life," Valrek replied. "You gave up memory to come back. The bond broke with it. You're not bound to me anymore. And I—" His voice caught, then steadied. "I won't chain you to something you don't remember. You're free, Oriath." Oriath stared at him, lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. He stood abruptly, turning away. The garden hummed around them. Wind in the trees. The smell of lavender. Valrek returned to planting. His hands shook only once. Evening fell. Later, as the last rays of sun burned the sky mauve and copper, Oriath stood at the garden's edge, arms wrapped around himself. He watched the stars bloom one by one above the ruined spires. Valrek appeared beside him, quietly, not too close. Oriath began. His voice was soft, tentative. "If we're not mates anymore," Valrek waited. Would you still stay? Oriath asked, eyes searching, voice barely audible. Even if I never remember? Even if I never love you like I did before? Valrek lowered to one knee, took Oriath's hand, pressed his lips to the back of it. Let me love you just once, he whispered. Even if it's only now, even if it's never again, even if it's not fate. Oriath trembled. Then slowly he sank down too, face tilted toward him. Their brows touched, breath shared. No promises, no imprints, just warmth, just choice. And that was enough. They worked side by side in the days that followed, turning the scarred earth of Ashvale into green. They cleared out rubble, carried buckets of water, laughed when the wheelbarrow broke and Valrek insisted he used to be stronger than this. They didn't speak of the past. But one evening, as Oriath was pressing the final seedling into the soil of a new flowerbed, Valrek reached into his coat and pulled out a chain. Frayed, rusted, the pendant cracked through the center. He didn't say a word, just buried it at the heart of the soil, beneath the roots of a new bloom. Oriath placed a hand over the mound. His expression was unreadable. Then he whispered, "Thank you." Days passed. Weeks. One morning, Valar Astoreth walked the perimeter of the garden, long coat trailing behind him like smoke. He did not speak to the boys working by the rose trellises. He only paused by the wall where the white flower had begun to grow, uncatalogued, unknown. A single bloom, pale as breath, delicate as ash. He folded his hands behind his back. His voice, when it came, was no more than a breath on the breeze. Mate marks can sever, pheromones may fade, but the hearts that once burned with love leave traces upon the soul, deep, unshakable, enduring. He looked toward where Oriath and Valrek knelt in the dirt, shoulders brushing, heads bowed in laughter. They are no longer mates, he said, almost reverent. They are something deeper. The wind passed through the garden, and the white flower bloomed,